Hello, everybody. Good day. Oh, I should check and make sure the mic's working. It is. Hello. I'm just getting a couple things set up here, if you'll bear with me a moment. Busy day. Very busy day. But thank you for coming by. Another episode of Mergedworlds, my Dungeons & Dragons story stream podcast thing. I spent almost all day writing. Almost the entire day. And my hands are killing me. To be honest, my fingers are purple and dented. I've been writing all day long. So hopefully you all will enjoy what I'm going to throw down for you all today. So again, this is all part of stuff that I've been working on for a very long time. So hopefully so. We'll do just a very brief synopsis, as always, of what we handled in the last episode. And then we'll see where we go from there. All right. So, as always, thank you for coming by. Mute this phone now. Pour myself a beverage. All day while I've been writing, I've had to... Mr. Midnight has decided to be clingy again today. He's been walking back and forth and back and forth. And he keeps sitting down on my book. I can't write with a kitty butt on there. But I did get a lot written. So, I believe we should get to it all today. I think. I hope so. Jim just got home. Excellent. Mr. Jim and Miss Smashley. Appreciate you hanging out. Hello, Muse Maze. Saw you posted a little bit earlier there as well. AC, is it fixed? Not sure yet. It's completely frozen over. A guy replaced the part. We're going to leave it to thaw all night long and try it in the morning and see if it works. If not, then it'll be way more expensive and even more money I don't have. So I guess we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. In last week's episode, certain mysterious man spoke to our heroes with tales and portents of the future, if you will, letting them know kind of basically what was going to be the primary one of the primary storylines moving forward. Now, I did want to stress that things that were learned last episode, and I'm being purposely vague. If somebody didn't watch those and is watching this episode, I really recommend watching that one first. Some things will be revealed potentially later today, but there will be many stories, many campaigns, many things going on throughout that time period, or the future of story-wise. There'll be different adventures and campaigns and such, but that behind the way that overarching storyline is what's going to connect a lot of it together, which has kind of been what has been going on in the original story, right? Originally, it was all about the artifact weapons and the god stones and Visanya stones and all that kind of stuff. There's still always that overarching storyline that connected many of the things together, except for the last one, which was the shark thing, and that was just for fun. But yes. So, in this adventure, we're going to be moving forward. And we ended last adventure with the heroes talking with their spouses and advising that they had decided to go ahead and let the children accompany Deacon back to his home, the Kingdom of Firemoon, which was part of the original plan before the attack of the undead on Serenity. The plan was for them to go with him to help celebrate the first birthday of his younger brother, Alexander. None of them had been there before. For almost all of them, it was the first time outside of literally Serenity at all. Within reason, as babies, they traveled to the Darshtopian Games. We know Petal was there and such. But as a whole, since they're old enough to know what was going on, none of them have left. So they were very much looking forward to it. And with the attack, they pretty much had given up on that. So they were very shocked and pleasantly surprised when their parents said, yeah, your guys are still good to go. And the only one we're sending with you is Flynn, because Flynn is who was going to be going with you originally. And Flynn was advised, hey, you know what? Let them have their own space. Let them do their thing. Be there if they need anything, Basically, you're their wallet if they need more money. But you'll be there if they need anything. But just enjoy yourself and let them have their own space. They've been through some stuff lately. So, and that's kind of where we're going to start our story today. And that is with the children heading to the Kingdom of Firemoon. So, road trip indeed, Miss Ashley. Road trip indeed. So, let's get on into it then. Try wet me whistle one last time. Delicious. Okay, so everybody dies. I'm just kidding. Okay, so the children arrive in the kingdom of Firemoon via the realm gate. You remember there are the realm gates that are throughout the world. But if you have a key and know the name of another gate, you can basically open up a portal to it. And as a point of clarification, any portal can go to any portal if you know the name of the one you're going to. So it's not like two of them are specifically linked or anything like that. That's not the case. So they arrive in the Kingdom of Firemoon as planned. So the only people in that group is Flynn, who's a Knight of Serenity, right? We know Flynn's there, the youngest of them actually. And then the 6 children. That is Seraph, Deacon, Ryan, Maeve, Petal, and Artis. And because this had been something that had been planned for a while, there's already a lot of stuff in place for this trip, special events and things that they're going to participate in, things they're going to see. Setting aside the attack on Serenity, all this stuff was already set up well ahead of time for them. So they arrive as planned. When they get there, they are greeted by Taborik and Smalzius. So Taborik and Smalzius are the ones that are meeting them there. It is approximately a 2-day trip, a day and a half, from the portal, which is on the very edge of Firemoon's territory, to the actual keep proper, which is the primary city of the Kingdom of Firemoon. So Taborik and Smalzius, meet them. They're excited to see everyone there. They're very happy to have Deacon home, because by this point, Mercy's already communicated with Rafe. They know what's happened. They know about the attack. They know about Deacon fighting, getting injured, being healed, all that kind of stuff. So, of course, they're very happy to have them home. Again, while they're considered barons or lords, if you will, of Firemoon, most of them carry the term ambassador of anything else, because they do a lot of traveling for Rafe. They've been there since he was born. Rafe is his best friend and their king. They look up to him, and his son being in danger, not cool, man, not cool at all. So they're happy to have him home. It's going to take about 2 days to get back. Taborik and Rafe have already made arrangements that they will be staying in an inn halfway there, in a town called Dumaris. And Dumaris is a medium-sized town, but it has an inn there that's quite popular. The food is not only exceptionally known to be good, but it's owned by a human bard who frequently, entertains there. Deacon, and that's where they normally stay on the way back anytime he travels to or from Serenity. Usually it's just him and some ambassadors on. And I should mention that with Taborik and with Smalzius, there are like 20 soldiers as well. Normally there's not quite this many, but with everything going on and the other children there as well, Rafe's added a little bit of security. But again, that was always intended to be that way. That's not necessarily because of what happened in Serenity. This is him protecting his son, but now also being responsible for a princess for the first time, right? He's used to trusting other people with his kid, as well as, Seraph, the daughter of the elf, Dandy, Darcy, these are all his friends and allies. He definitely wants to make sure they're taken care of. So they travel and they're making their way, and most of the stuff they go through is farmland. You'll find little villages and such. It's a lot like Serenity in its overall makeup, except Serenity is much more hilly, whereas Firemoon is very, very flat. Very flat land. But it's really good farmland. It was very easy to do that, and that's one of the things that helped that grow. But we're going to cover that in a minute. But as they're traveling through, they see other people on the road. They see sometimes other soldiers passing through, and everyone recognizes, Taborik and Smalzius, and they're all going to recognize Deacon as well. They probably don't have a clue who anybody else is, but the fact that they're traveling with the prince and the two ambassadors itself is a pretty big deal. So they get a lot of waves and greetings and such, and there's occasionally where Tabork and Smalzius will stop and chat with another group of guards. Hey, how are things going? Any problems out here? No, everything's been fine, so on and so forth. Thank you for checking. You know, they stop for just a couple minutes. Deacon's used to this, so a lot of times they're just kind of just traveling along. And while they're traveling through, they're telling stories. They're kind of telling a little bit of the history of Firemoon. And many of you have heard some of this already, but I'm going to touch upon a couple things because while the children have an overall historical view of it, they're also getting it from their parents' point. I'm going to kind of talk about it from some of the early stuff. So one of the first things that they ask is for Flynn, or not Flynn, sorry, well, Flynn's there, and they meet with Flynn, of course, and while they're traveling, the first thing they do is ask Flynn, hey, what happened in Serenity? Because they've got the overall gist from Rafe, but even Rafe doesn't have all the details yet. And that was why it was still important to send Flynn. Number one, that was what was originally supposed to happen, and they definitely didn't want to mess and try to change anything. But Flynn would now be able to give a very much more detailed, account than probably the children would. Children are. Everybody sees it differently, and everybody different point of view. Flynn would come more with facts. So he tells the story and what all he knows. He says, this is what I was involved in. This is what I heard happened in this area. And he talks about the point where Deacon and Seraph, fought with the other children alongside to help fight the undead and to save other people. And hearing this, both Tabork and Smalzius are very proud of that, right? Because they look at him like a nephew or a son of their own kind of thing. So they even make comments like, excellent. It's like we sucks that happened, but excellent. He'll be a great king one day, that kind of thing. Look at him already jumping in there, kind of stuff. So they kind of talk about the history of Firemoon, and I'm going to give a few details here that are going to matter more today than ever before, because this stuff wasn't really important when we talked about Firemoon, and that's kind of how the kingdom of Firemoon is set up. So the keep itself sits on an oddly shaped rocky mountain surrounded by a very lush valley. So imagine that. Imagine just a very almost narrow mountain coming up out of the ground, right? And it's probably jagged at the top, but it's been almost, the keep has been built into the top of it. There's kind of a winding road that comes to the bottom. And the city is inside this valley and then up and out beyond that at that point. But when Rafe was given this keep, because again it was gifted to him by Zoltan. Hey, there's a name we like. It was gifted it by Zoltan. It was already there. To this day, he has none of them have any idea who built the keep, who lived there, or why. When they arrived, when it was given to them, by this point, Tabork and them were already allies of Rafe. Well, Nylat was given another one very much like it down in the southern section of the continent that they lived on. Rafe was given one that was a little bit more north and north central. And so they were built kind of in the same way, and the mountains even kind of matched, which was odd, in itself. So they get in there and they move in, and Zoltan's like, hey, here's your new house. And they pop in, and it already has like some sparse furniture in it, not a lot. Everything that is in there looks very, very old, but the place doesn't look ransacked or anything like that when they're explaining their first time in there. The chairs aren't all flipped over and trashed in places and such. It's like somebody built it, put some stuff in there, and then left. It's dusty. There's no old food. We also don't find anything that would show up to be personal belongings. There's no things like dishes. There's no weapons and armor and things of that nature there. But they do find some shelves, tables, chairs, things of that nature, beds, dressers, things like would be overall furniture kind of stuff in many of the rooms. And then in many of the rooms, they would just be completely empty. It's almost like someone started to decorate the house or started to move in and then stopped. So at first, it was just them that kind of living there by himself. It was Rafe, Rohan, who, if you'll remember, is the Knight of the Light. He's a Cleric of the Light. Cleric of the Light, who's a dwarf. And then there was Tabork, who at the time still had 2 arms, was a minotaur, Smalzius, Thickaway, and there was a half-elven mage that was part of their group as well, who I'm gonna be honest, I've searched everywhere. I can't find his name for nothing. I have to reach out and see if anybody that was in part of that original story remembers. But it was a half-elven mage, and the half-elven mage actually died in the final fight against Nylat. He was there for a little while. But he was the last to join, and then he passed away. For no specific reason. I didn't create him to be. That's just how it was great for the story at the time, you know. But it was just them living there themselves. And they were there for a couple of months, and then a man and a woman arrived. And the boy's name was Mikhail. Mikhail and Michelle, and they were brother and sister. And they arrived, and they were looking for work. They were, they're from a town. Their parents had passed away. They didn't really have much of their own, son on their own, and they were kind of poked. They heard word that coming this direction would be a good thing to do. No problem, Mystique. Appreciate you hanging in. Right now I'm just doing some kind of... the kids just arrived in the Kingdom of Firemoon, and they're learning a little bit about the history of the origins of Firemoon. So, they were hired because, these were guys who were used to being out in the adventures and such like that. Not real homey types. They didn't have... They lived on basic food, what they could hunt and find. But Michelle was an excellent cook, and Mikhail was really, really good at taking care of stuff. He ended up becoming the head steward. And not long after they arrived, more and more people started showing up, all with the same tale. They heard that there was a benevolent lord who lived in this thing, who could offer them land and protection and things of that nature. So as they showed up, Rafe was like, okay, and he kind of much like Serenity began, but by accident. He's like, okay, you can have this farmland, you pay me this much and you can stay there. I'm like, wow, that's a low price. And you'll protect us? He's like, well, sure, yeah, why not? And they're like, okay, that's awesome. And so more and more people came, and the city grew very, very quickly. Almost immediately, Rafe and Michelle hit it off. It was one of those undercover things where, you could tell they both liked each other and everybody knew it, but they were all like shy around each other, and it took a while for it to actually come out in that way. But throughout this whole time, of course, he grew closer to Michelle. The kingdom grew, wealth grew, and occasionally they would go out on adventures and do things to help protect this or save the world or fight the dragon, whatever the case may be. Eventually, of course, as this is going on, Rafe's allies became lords or barons, like I talked about earlier, much the same way the Knights of Serenity existed. That's what Taborik and them were to Rafe. And Rafe also had the Knights of Firemoon, which was him just the name of his soldiers overall. So he had many of them, and they continued to grow as quickly as the kingdom did. Because it gets bigger, you need more people to protect it, right? So that was going on. Everything was going well. And let's see. Of course, all that came to a rush and sudden end the day that the kingdom was attacked by the Baron. And of course, the Baron, they would learn much later on, was actually Nylat, Firemoon Rafe's brother, but he attacked and, of course, kidnapped Michelle and took her away. And then there became a big race around the world trying to catch him and save her and save the world from him. So they don't go into a lot of that detail. That's the more common known stuff, but the origins and beginnings of Firemoon, not quite as much. So I decided to touch on a little bit of that today. But the city has outgrown the valley at this point. The city itself, I would say, is probably the same size as Serenity, if not a little bigger. Probably a little bigger. Although Serenity has grown much more in land. So outside of Serenity City, there's all the other towns that they've kind of scooped up to become part of it. Rafe wasn't like that. There was just tons of land around for him that no one lived in. And as the city growing out, little things popped up here and there, but he never really tried to take in other villages himself. It's happened occasionally, but it's never been something he sought to do by any means. So So since the merge, the kingdom, of course, has still continued to grow, and for many of the same reasons. They say, oh, here's a place where people are treated fairly and you're given protection. That's going to attract a lot of people from a lot of different worlds. When you don't know what's going on, you're in a new world and dangerous stuff is out there. The Knights of Firemoon have grown, again, quite exponentially at this point, and probably rival Paxawal. Paxawal and Firemoon probably have the largest militaries of any of them. Mercy's has a good side one in Serenity, but it doesn't touch either of theirs. And the only real difference between Paxawal and Firemoon is Firemoon's doesn't have a navy. There's no ocean there, whereas Paxawal has that as well, but manpower-wise, they're about the same. So as they travel for a good chunk of the day, and as it's starting to get a little bit later, they reach the town of Damaris, and they stay at the Dove's Song Inn. As I mentioned earlier, the bard's name is Maria, but very often she's known as Dove. That's her nickname. And so they get to stay there, and they get to kind of hang out. There's a small celebration that night. You can imagine they've already rented rooms, right? They already know this. People know that the prince and the group are coming through, and with special guests. So the inn would have had, extra food up there. People who lived in the town would probably want to show up to see these people. It's like, ooh, there's the ambassador. It's like celebrities coming through town, right? But now they're bringing celebrities. People are going to hear, ooh, this is the princess of another kingdom we've heard about for years but have never been to. Or and then the head elven cleric who's, known in the lands for being just a really high, powerful cleric has sent her son here. And he looks weird. Let's go look at him. It's just one of those things where people would be interested in what would be the equivalent of celebrities in that kind of society. So when they arrive there, there's a bit of celebration. There's dancing and people eating and such, and the kids, of course, don't get drunk by any means, but they'll have a touch of wine now and again because that's how life works then. So they're just kind of hanging out, enjoying the food, listening to the music. Maria, Dove, sings a song, Tale of Two Brothers, which is probably one of the more famous ballads in the Kingdom of Firemoon. And it's always been Deacon's favorite. It's just basically a story of Rafe and Nylat through metaphor. You know what I mean? It's not saying them by name, and the story's not exactly the same, but it's metaphor for that, and everybody knows that. While this is going on, and this is people are bringing food and drinks, the serving girls, a couple of barmaids, pay a little bit of extra attention to Deacon and Sarah. Deacon because he's the prince, right? That's just kind of how that works. Some people are always going to try to gain station in that way, And while he may be young now, he won't be young forever, And for Seraph, he is the oldest of everyone there, and he looks older than he is. Like I said, he's almost 16, but he could easily pass for 18. He's physically grown. He's big. He's height. He's at 6 feet. He's muscular because of all the workout and training he does with his father and such. So, physical size, he's probably about the size he's going to be most of his life, unless he decides to get jacked for some reason. And I would think with the elven patronage part of his blood, that he'll never be quite what I'd say huge jacked kind of thing. He always have a touch of thinness because of that, but the thinness he has is still very muscular. So while this is happening, Deacon laughs it off, right? Because the girls, Artis and Maeve, they pointed out oh, hey, serving girls seem to be throwing a little flirt your way. And Deacon laughs it off, and he's like, oh, yeah, it happens, it's one of those things. And kind of hints to Artis hey, give it time. Give it time. If you haven't seen it yet, you're going to notice it soon. And I'm like, trust me, yeah. He goes, that's what it is. Seraph, it just makes him uncomfortable. He's just, as it is, he's the one who's sitting there the most, and he's just quietly listening. He doesn't talk as much as everyone else. When spoken to, he'll reply. He's not rude or anything like that. If someone asks him something about himself, or hey, tell me about the time this happened, he'll tell the story, and he'll be quite friendly and slightly bardic in the way that he tells his stories. But with him, he's with the long white hair and the smooth skin, all that kind of stuff. He looks pretty attractive as a person. So, but he's not very comfortable about the whole romantic stuff. He doesn't understand any of that. Doesn't interest him. It's not his jam right now. But the night's fun. There's lots of singing, and he really enjoys bard stuff. That's him. That's one thing that Seraph has always enjoyed. He loves hearing. He has no desire to do it himself. He's not a singer. He's never really tried. I'll say it's probably one of the few skills he doesn't have. He doesn't have the best singing voice, nor would he want to. But he loves hearing other people sing or hearing poetry and things of that nature. So while this is going on, people are chatting and hanging out. At one table, partway through the night, a conversation is struck up between one of the children and one of the adults. And that is Taborek and Maeve. Taborek, of course, one of the only real one of the very few Minotaurs living in the Kingdom of Firemoon. And Maeve, there's not a whole lot of Minotaurs in Serenity. I'm sure there's going to be one or two everywhere, but not many. So she doesn't get to, for 3 out of 4 months, she doesn't have a lot of time to talk to her own kind. And Taborek, I'm sure, senses this and uses this as an opportunity to strike up a conversation with the young girl. And he starts, asking questions like, I see you're going for a cleric. That's where you feel pulled, so on and so forth. That's excellent. He goes, it's, the devotion to the gods is always a great thing, because from when it comes to religious stuff, Minotaurs are really high on the religious chart, though, as a race, very related, but usually for only a certain specific gods. There's exceptions to every rule, of course, but majority-wise. And so they kind of start checking about. He's asking her questions like, what made you first think that? What made you? When did you feel your pull? And she's telling this story, but he senses hesitation from her when she's talking. She's explaining this, and when I was young, this happened, and I was asking a lot of questions, and so I was sent to Serenity instead, where they thought I might find a better place, and I felt myself drawn towards Zorn, the god of truth, very easily, and Artemis had already been my friend by that point, and her, even though she's a little bit older than Artis, she's always idolized Artis a little bit. They're like sisters, and so getting to do that with her was awesome, But she admits to him that she sometimes feels a bit guilty. He asks her why that is, and she says, well, again, she feels drawn and devoted to Zorn, the god of truth. Feels called to him and such, but no matter what she tries, no matter what she does, she finds herself always questioning things, even the tenets of their faith. And that's one of the things that got her to Serenity to begin with. The Minotaur clergy are like, hey, she really likes God. She feels that pull. But in a very short period of time, they're like, she questions everything about every god that we normally worship. We feel that she might be better off, speaking with gods that we don't normally deal with, because she clearly has a pull, but not kind of where we chill. And this is the same kind of thing. She goes that she's never really grown out of that, if you will. Even with Zorn, there's questions and things. And Taborek laughs when he hears this, and she's a little taken back, and he's like, well, that's good then. He goes, he says, that's good. Questioning is good. Seeking the truth. That's what you do. He goes, there's nothing wrong with that. And then he goes into one of those really classic father-daughter kind of moments when he's like, reminds her of a young Minotaur he met once, many years ago. That much like Taborek, this Minotaur was also a bit of an outcast from the normal Minotaur society. Instead of living there, he found himself that he was the type of person who looked at the world differently, surrounded himself with people from many different races and such. Where traditionally Minotaurs saw weaknesses of the other races and constantly felt superior. Instead, this Minotaur, this man was very different. Instead, he learned from them, trusted them. And together, they helped change the world. By the time you get to this story, Maeve is caught on that he's obviously talking about her father. Because, he spent some time with that as well, with Darsh. Kind of ends the story by saying, it's good that she questions. You can think of no better way of serving the Lord of Truth than by spending her life always looking for it. And then, she kind of feels a little bit better about it. She feels a little bit better about the situation. He's kind of pumped up her a little bit there. Said, yeah, it's okay what you're doing. That's a good thing. That's what it's supposed to be. And then, and he says, whichever way her journey takes her, he wishes her well and has absolute faith that she'll eventually find the truth she's looking for. So, evening celebration, things go on. Night comes to an end. Everyone ends up going to sleep. Up relatively early the next morning. They'd like to make it to the Kingdom of Firemoon by about midday. So that, they've got a little bit of time before, they got to right to bed kind of thing. So they travel on. Now, much as before, travel's the same. The closer they get to the city, the more civilization you see, more towns and homes and stuff together. So they get stopped a little more often by people or waves and so on. But as they're making their way through, it goes well. Now, this day, the day that they're going to arrive, is the day before the celebration officially begins. It's supposed to go on just for a few days, and it's to celebrate the, again, first birthday of his younger brother, Alexander. So Alexander is like a good decade younger. At first, they did not plan on not having a second child, and it just kind of happened. But they're like, cool, nothing wrong with that. Much like the festival of Serenity that just got ruined, people from all over the kingdom have come. Unlike Serenity, it's not a lot of people from outside the kingdom have come. This is specifically a Fire Moon thing of that nature. And so while there are of course going to be people who come through to try to sell their wares and things, there's not quite as many international folks sliding through, if you will. That is so sweet. Well, I'm glad you like that. But there's a ton of stuff to see and do while they're there, and they're going to do a lot of it, and we're going to talk about that. The book said the actual birthday is the first day of celebration. Then they timed it well so they could get there right beforehand. So as they get to the city proper, they're making their way through the seats. This is all exciting to the rest of the kids. They've never been here, right? And as Deacon, you can imagine, if you've ever taken someone to somewhere you're really like that they've never been, that feeling of getting to show it off. And over there's this thing, and then that store's awesome. They've got great sandwiches, and that place there. Oh, if you want a donut, that's the place. It's one of those things where he gets to kind of show off his home for the first time. He's spent years living in Serenity, but they've never been here, so he gets to play the part of host, and he likes that. So he's pointing out things as they go through, and again, even before they reach the city, they can see the keep on the top of the mountain. It's you kind of come up, and there's a hill, like you said, it's a bit of a valley, not perfectly round or anything, but it's a bit of a valley, and then the rock comes up and the keep's on it, and then they come over and it's just all city around there. So they go through the streets, and there's already decorations up, and just like any other festival, there's people already there selling wares and trying to make some money ahead of time, right? They can. If you bring a wagon full of stuff to sell and you can sell it by halfway through, you get to leave early, that's success. Or better yet, halfway through you're done selling, you can enjoy the rest of the festival without having to man your stall or your booth or your table, whatever you've got going on. As someone who's done that, it's awesome when you sell out all your stuff early and you can just spend the rest of the time enjoying something. So, they make it their way through the city itself, getting lots of decorations, banners and such, and but they make their way through, lots of cheering and waving and things of that nature. And then they travel up the road to get to the keep. As I mentioned, the road actually goes around the keep and such. It's been widened out over years. It's actually quite thin when they first got there way back in the day. But there has been some changes to that and a railing put in to make it a little bit safer. As this is the one spot where Serenity has a bonus. Serenity Keep is built up on that hill, but then comes down it and spreads into the base of the hill at this point. It's kind of in the city. You can't build any more castle up there. It already takes up the whole top of this thing. So for them to expand in room, they had to expand at the bottom of the keep, and so down at the bottom of the mountain, and that's what's happened. There's a couple things hollowed into the mountain places. You could pull in if another cart's coming, so you got room and things. But the castle itself is as big as it's ever going to be. They finally reach the top. Both Rafe and Michelle are waiting for them. Both super excited to see Deacon back. It's been 3 months since they've seen him. He goes to Serenity for 3 months, comes back for a month. So that's kind of his cycle for schooling. It's the same cycle that Maeve is on with going back and visiting her parents. Michelle, of course, was worried, and as Rafe was when they heard everything that had gone on, but they're very happy to have them home. Alexander is sleeping at this point, and so there's a nanny with him, so they get to greet without the little boy. They'll get to meet him a little bit later. Rafe, of course, thanks Flynn for bringing his son home, because technically he's the elder there, right? This kind of thing. And then, of course, greets the children warmly. He's met them all at least a couple times. You can imagine that Rafe would have come at least once or twice over the last 8 years to Serenity to see something involving Deacon. You know what I mean? He's participating in this, or he's just coming to support his son and see what he's learned. Or there's going to be at least one point, if he's letting his kid learn at the Mage Tower, he's want to go see where he's learning. Remember, Rafe, not super fan of mages, not against them, but he doesn't want a Mage Tower in Firemoon. He's still not approving that. But he has no problem with Petal. That's just, obviously, his son's mage. He's not anti-mage. His son's getting some magical training as well. They meet the children. They say, I know you guys are tired and such, so I have some people here. They're going to show you to your rooms, give you a chance to rest, freshen up and such, and then we'll meet up again in a little bit. This is a chance for them to spend a little bit of time with Deacon alone. Because, they're going to want that too, right? So they're taken to the rooms. They're actually escorted by Michelle's, who at this point himself doesn't necessarily work there anymore. He has an inn that he owns and such, but he's always up there helping out and such. He was head of the keep for a very long time till he passed it off and went into his own private sector, if you will. But he still pops up from time to time because he still considers, technically Deacon's his nephew, right? Yes, it's his sister's kid, so there's that involved. So he's always involved with things like that. Michael was about 6 years older than Michelle, so he had a few years on her. So at this point, he's married with kids of his own somewhere else, down in the city itself. They're taken to their rooms, and while that's going on, Rafe. Deacon and his mom go, and they go, gets to see his little brother and stuff. Hasn't seen him in a few months. Gets to tell his stories where the children are taking room. Flynn has an opportunity to talk to Rafe. And they go somewhere private, and he tells him all the details and probably fills him in on more stuff than he would have said openly in front of Smalzius and Tabork, not because they can't be trusted, but he doesn't want to throw it all in front of the kids either. How bad it actually was, You could imagine they try to shelter the kids from that kind of thing as much as they can. But Rafe hears the story, and and he tells Flynn, even though Serenity is very far away, Rafe isn't taking any chances right now. Expect with the children here, whether or not his kid was the targeted one or it's one of the others, he's not playing around. Every single warrior and knight in his employ is currently patrolling. There's excess security well outside the city that should any force or even small group of any kind try to make its way towards the city, they'll know well ahead of time. Tabork was overseeing a lot of that kind of thing. Tons of extra security. And Ray says that he originally had planned to give the children run of the city. The city is known as a safe city. Of all of them, maybe the exception of Serenity, it's known to be a very safe city. I'm sure there's a thieves guild and such. There always is, but again, you don't push things too far, because then the Lord just ends up coming down and thumping everybody to find the villains. So you make waves, but you don't flip the boat, kind of thing, when you're that kind of thing. So it's known as a relatively safe place. Deacon has always had the run of the town whenever he wanted, within reason, I'm sure. But he said that was originally, but with what's going on, he understands if Mercy would like the children to have extra bodyguards. He said he's already arranged for that, should that be their wish. And he doesn't take it personally. He's like, hey, we understand you're worried about your kids. I was worried about mine. Yeah, but Flynn goes, no, that actually won't be necessary. Mercy and Artemis made it quite clear to me that the children are to have their freedom on this trip. They went through a lot as well. It was definitely a shock to them. They had to go through, and they were looking forward to this. It's important to her that they get a chance to unwind and be themselves and have a space. So I'm here for support only. We're going to do it just like it was going to be done originally. And he also makes a comment that, made it clear that everyone, she trusts Rafe as much as he trusts her. It's like, you trust me with Deacon 3 months of the year. I trust my kids with you. It's no worries. Which Rafe is always happy to hear. Rafe does make a comment that he really hoped Deacon would not have to face battles so young. When he sent him there to train, he never really assumed it would be, you'd have to use these abilities at his young age, right? He's 11, almost 12 at this point. But he does comment that he's glad that when that opportunity arose and he was forced into that situation, that he learned that his son had fought bravely and to protect not just innocent people, but the people he cared about, his friends and loved ones. So his instinct was to fight to protect. And so, because Mercy at this point had kind of sent Flynn on this, like, is Rafe going to be coming back at some point? Or is a Deacon? You know what I mean? Because he might be like, okay, listen, I'm not sending the kid back. Obviously, that could happen. But Rafe points out that he and Michelle had spoke on it in great length. As any decision, he would always include her, what's best. And Deacon would, of course, have a word to say in his own. But they both, of course, had come to the conclusion that with what they'd heard, what they learned, that they're happy with the education and training that he's getting. Not only was he able to fight in a situation like that exceptionally well, but the type of person he's coming, they like that. So if Deacon wishes to return, he will have that freedom. And, looking, and him and Flynn both laugh when he's like, I think we already know what answer he's going to pick. And Flynn's like, yeah, I understand. So the children's rooms are near each other. Basically, the 3 girls have a room that has a central common room. So they go into this common room. Each room has a bedroom. Seraph and Ran are in the same kind of situation, with the 3rd room just being empty at this point. Deacon has his own room, which is near his brother. His mom's going to want him hanging out in those rooms as much as he can. So he won't be staying in the same rooms as Seraph and Ran. And most of the time, when everybody's hanging out and chilling between going out of the city or out into the city, they hang out in the girls' common area more than anything else. So the children have time to unpack and put their stuff away. Deacon spends some time with his brother and his mother, and the girls are chatting and talking about what they all saw. They know there's going to be a big festival. There's going to be games, competitions, stuff like that. Artis, Maeve, and Petal have been invited to spend a very special day at the temple. It had already been previously arranged, and all 3 of them are really excited with that. Petal is very excited because she gets the opportunity to meet Thickaway Tricklebush, a legendary kender that in all of her time she's never had the chance to meet in person. Although Dandy has spoken of him fondly many, many times, she's never had the opportunity to meet him in person. So eventually everybody comes in the girls' area. They, so they're hanging out after everybody's unpacked and they have a chance to just rest a little bit, kind of talking about what's going to happen next. Deacon arrives after he's had some time, and he's like, hey, we're going to have food here in a little while, but first I'm going to give everybody a tour of the castle. He's going to, again, much like wants to show off his house. I'm sure he's going to want to show Seraph his room. Kids always want to show other kids their room. I'm a grown man, and I love showing people this room. So that stuff never goes away. So, yes. So they have the big tour. It goes around. Everybody's really cool. They get to see stuff. There is one room that Deacon's a little nervous to take them into. He's like, I'm going to take you into a room. We don't use this room anymore. Okay? But I've been given permission to show you. They're like, okay. I'm only talking about it. It's not but I'm going to take you in there so you can see it. So they go into a room, and it's a really large room. It's very long and rectangular. And as soon as they go inside, they're all like, oh, what's that smell? Oh, there's a stink in here. Seraph could smell it outside, up the hallway on their way there. But once they're inside, they're all like, oh, that's horrible. What is that smell? And Deacon's like, yeah, and they're like, it's a big empty room. There's nothing in, maybe a couple empty chairs or a table. But, this would be a great room for storage, but there's nothing in here. He's like, come with me, I'll show you. I walk to the far end of the room, and I get to the end. The wall looks odd. Like, it's not completely wall. Like, it's not smooth, right? It seems lumpier. And Sarah figures it out before anyone else. But they get there, and they're up close, and they're like, and part of the wall's blackened, like it was on fire. And that seems to be where the smell is coming from. And they get close to it, and Deacon's like, okay, you can touch it if you want to, but I don't recommend it. And they're like, it's a wall. Why would we not want to touch it? He's like, I'm just telling you. Of course, they're all children. Like, well, of course we're going to touch it then. And when they're approaching the wall, it's squishy. Almost like a balloon full of very thick pudding. It bends in just a little bit. It's got a texture to it. And it's Petal that first realizes that the wall is skin. And as soon as they realize that, they're all like, ugh, and they step back like, ugh. And then they realize that the smell is coming from the blackened section of the wall. It smells like burnt skin. The smell will never fade. Many years ago, the early days of Rafe Firemoon, this was a room that he had set up as an actually indoor archery range, because Rafe was trying to learn to become an archer. And sometimes they'd come in here and they would test out magic items and things that they found. Well, Thickaway had found a wand. It looked like it was, everybody said it was a wand of magic missiles. It looked just like the wand of magic missile their friend had, the half-elven mage. And so they came in here, and he's like, cool, I'm going to shoot at the target. And Rafe's like, yeah, go ahead. If you want to use up some of your wand, he's cool. So Thickaway goes, pow, and shoots 2 back to back. It was not a wand of magic missiles. It was a wand of wonder. And a wand of wonder in Dungeons and Dragons is a wand that has multiple different effects. And you roll each time to see what happens. We rolled, and the first one was stone to flesh, and the second one was 6 foot by 6 foot fireball. So the wall immediately turned to skin, and then the fireball hit it. And there was a big rush to put it out. There was buckets, and somebody had a jug of like unending water. It's like you open up and it's just all water. And he's sitting there with this jug just streaming water on top of it. Big fire and burnt skin and it was smoke and all that stuff. But the smell never, ever, ever went away. And so they don't use the room. They were going to use it for storage, but everything you put in here ended up smelling that way. So they normally just keep it all sealed off. This room's basically a big, empty, awesome-looking room that's useless in the middle of the keep. And that's true. That happened on way back in the early days of Firemoon. Thickaway had a wand of wonder. So it's one of those cool little snippets from the early days I was excited to have an opportunity to show. So Deacon then takes them out. They go and they go to the main dining room, the personal dining room of the king. And there's, of course, a huge table there. And they're all going to get to eat with the king and the queen. And several of all the ambassadors are here. The only one that's not here right now is Taborik, who is checking on some last-minute security things now that he's back from his trip. So they also had a chance to meet Alexander. I should mention that. Alexander's there as well when they first get there. They're joined by pretty much everybody except Taborik. But Smalzius, Rohan, and Thickaway is there. So Petal, of course, super excited to meet Thickaway, goes up and begins talking to him. And Thickaway kind of comes off a little bit like a turd. He's like, oh, Petal, yes, I've heard of you. I've heard stories. I am told you fancy yourself a wizard? Kender wizard. Never heard of such a thing. Odd. I don't know how I can feel about it. She's like, yes, sir. I'm training to be, a wizard. He's like, strange. Kender wizard. Never thought I'd see such a thing. And then he kind of gets down and looks right in her face and goes, show me some magic then. And she's just kind of taken aback. She's like, because you just don't whip out magic spells. And she looks over at the king, Rafe, and Rafe's like, go ahead, sure. And so she steps back and she's like, okay. And she looks a little nervous. And then all of a sudden she just her face goes serious and she starts concentrating. And Maeve and Artis just get to smile on their face because they know that she is half Kender. When she starts talking, she does not shut up. She is just as grabby and things end up in her pouches when they're not supposed to be. But when she starts concentrating on magic, the Kender stuff gets pushed aside. The human half takes over and she is full focus. So she casts a very small illusion spell. Nothing big, nothing that would harm anything in there, because, again, you got to remember that both her and Deacon are wild mages, which means it doesn't matter how well they cast the spell, there's always the chance it might do something different. And sometimes it's not good. So She creates an illusion of a small rainbow-colored butterfly, and it starts flitting around the room, and the baby's like, oh, you know, kind of thing, and everybody's kind of smiling at it, and it flitters over, and it comes over and lands on Thickaway's nose. And it sits there for a second flapping, and then it pops, like a balloon popping, like that loud, and a bunch of glitter goes all over his face. Just put a glitter. And he looks down, he pulls the glitter off his face, and he looks at it, and he looks at it, and he goes, that was the coolest thing I've ever seen. And just starts being all excited. He's like, magic, I can't believe it, Kender magic, blah, blah, blah. What's it like? How did you, what? And just starts asking questions. And he chatters, and him chattering their ear off the whole rest of the night. You know, he was just trying to look cool in front of the other Kender. But yeah, that totally blew his mind. He's like, oh, you did that. And so they start learning, all chatting about that. And Deacon chiming in occasionally as well, also learning wild magic and such. So, let me see. Rafe asks plan. Deacon talks about, they talk about what they're planning to do over the next few days, so on and so forth. But one of the things says, well, you definitely take your time and you enjoy yourself the city. I would ask only that you stay inside the city. If you are to leave the city, please let us know and we will have guards attend you. But in the city, you don't have to take any guards or protection. There's guards everywhere. You're not going to walk 10 feet without seeing one, kind of thing. With the festival going on. But do me a favor and try to stay to the, more crowd-filled people. And Deacon's like, really? What? Why is that? He goes, well, it's a celebration and such, criminal element, things of that nature. And he goes, I'll be honest. He goes, something that, isn't quite common knowledge. We've heard reports that the Thieves Guild may be having some issues. And Deacon's like, what's that mean? He goes, there's rumors that there's another group trying to muscle in on territory kind of thing. So it's a bit of a two thieves guilds fighting for control over the city. And while there hasn't been any issues, it's probably best you just kind of, stay to the public areas best you can, especially at night. And then, that way, you don't get pulled in the middle of something you don't need to. And that's not meant to be ominous. I'm just filling voids. So, yeah. So they enjoy a meal, they have some stories, so on and so forth, but after all the travel, they're all pretty tired, and they want to get to the next day where the fun stuff starts, so they all head to bed pretty quickly. So the next day all goes as planned. The girls are taken to the temple, okay? And I want to stress at this point that all the kids are armed. It's common for people to walk about the streets with their sword on, or their dagger, or whatever the case may be. And as this is their first time traveling away from home, they have their weapons with them. Seraph has his sword. Deacon always has his sword, even though he's traveling in the safest place for him. You know what I mean? Petal has her staff that she has, or Hoopak, I'm sorry. Hoopak, she's probably got a couple daggers on her. And both Maeve and Artis have their, I want to say they use Morning Stars, or was it hammers? Top of my head, I can't remember. It's blunt. That's all I remember, because they're a cleric. But Deacon and Seraph and Rand, they all go to the temple to drop the girls off. The girls were especially invited to something because Deacon was invited as well, but he wants to hang out with Seraph and Rand, so they're going to kind of just bumble around the town while the girls do their thing. So Rohan, who's the head cleric, much like Artemis is the head of hers, gives them a tour of the temple, right? It's not as big as the one in Serenity, but it's really cool. It's got a lot more dwarven-themed architecture since he designed it. But they get to see a very, very special ceremony. So they go to one section of the temple, and then they're allowed inside. And inside this here, they see that there's a huge forge made. He is a dwarf, after all. But there's a forge here, because there's quite a few people here that worship the mountain god. Right, Corum, the god of the mountain, or Thorin, god of the mountain, or also known as the Forge Lord. And so they're here to see a man named Barrick. Barrick is a very large human. He looks like he's in his 50s, but he's just pure muscle. And as soon as they get into the room, it's hot. It's very hot. And there's several assistants in there helping Barrick what he's doing, but they come in and they get to sit down, and they sit there for a little while, and their drinks are brought in because it's hot, but they're all sitting there kind of watching him forge, and Rowan kind of explains what's going on to them. Says that right now Rohan is currently forging his pinnacle, and that he's been forging for a little over 24 hours straight without stopping. Now, the girls being clerics have probably heard something about Pinnacle, but like they don't know the specifics. None of them really worship the mountain god, and there's probably a couple in Serenity, but not a whole lot. And so they ask, okay, what is a Pinnacle? And Rohan explains to them that those clerics who worship the Forge Lord, at some point in their life, will feel an inspiration, a desire to make something. They'll feel driven to make it. They'll see that image in their head, or they'll see the design. And it could be different things. It could be a weapon, could be a shield, could be armor, could be a piece of jewelry. It's almost always going to have something metal. There may be jewels and stuff as well, but things that kind of fit within that real forge-like thing. And they'll be pushed to make that mentally. And at the end of it, they will cast their spells upon it to invoke it, to basically create a magic item or artifact. And, you know, some clerics may never get above level 3. You know, you look at it from a D&D standpoint. Not everybody goes out and adventures and gets a ton of experience, right? So somebody, their pinnacle might not be that powerful. And you may have someone who's dedicated their whole life to it, who's like Rohan's level. He's not a cleric of Thorn, but just an example. Who would make something quite powerful. And Beric is one of those people. Beric is probably the equivalent of about a 13th or 14th level. So what he's going to make is going to have a step above the average thing. It probably won't be quite a magic item, but an artifact. And sometimes, while they have the physical image, they don't know exactly what it's going to do. Because when they cast their spells and their blessings, that is given from the Forge Lord to them. So sometimes even they can be surprised with what the end result is. Like if they're making a sword, it's going to be a sword. But a sword of what? They may not know exactly. But not only will they be driven to this, of course, they'll have to use just the highest quality of stuff. You know what I mean? The gems are going to be incredibly expensive. It could take sometimes years for them to gather all the different ingredients they need to make their pinnacle. Because it's literally the pinnacle of their career. And once they've done that, they'll never make anything of that caliber again. They'll make other stuff, maybe more magical stuff, but they'll never make anything as at the caliber of their pinnacle. So they put their entire selves into it, and who they are and what they do and the type of person they are will affect what that outcome will be. Hello, Sky. So Beric has been working. They sit there for a couple of hours until he's about finished. But finally, after a couple hours and just drenched in sweat, they're sitting there watching. He finishes, and then they forging what he's making. They can see, because they've been watching it for a while. He's making a sword, and it appears to be just a regular long sword in size. Although they've seen gems set into it that just definitely glisten. The room itself is not well lit, except for a couple of ventilation shafts and the heat of the flames coming off the forge. Yes, so the blade itself is incredibly beautiful, and they get to watch the spell cast, and that's really the big part that they're there to see, because it's not common for this to happen, especially something of this mojo, and Rohan himself is going to be assisting. So when it gets to that point, he's not casting any spells on the weapon itself. That's purely for the maker. But he will be using spells to clarify, sanctify, and take anything in the room that could taint the spell or its end product. He's basically clearing the room of that, so that way Beric can cast his spell. And that happens. And when it's all said and done, the blade itself, which he names something, it's not important. The blade, I want to point out, not important to the story. It's not a blade that's going to pop up later. This is meant more to show you something that this type of clear could produce. So I'm not planting a seed with everything that I say, mind you. But the sword itself, when they're done, it turns out it will cut through stone and most metals very easily. Like, it's not like a hot butter, but they can put their thing on it and cut through a rock or something. So it's a very, very sharp blade. When they do, it doesn't lose its edge. But testing it, it won't cut flesh. So the sword will cut through solid inanimate objects without losing a blade, but it will not cut flesh. Looks razor sharp, you slide it across your tongue, won't do anything to you. It will not cut living flesh, which then strikes up a conversation. The girls are brought to this. Well, how could this be used to benefit people? And then the conversation pops up, especially with what just recently happened in Serenity. Okay, won't cut through living flesh. Will it cut through undead flesh? Ron's like, that's a great question. We won't know until we test it. Hey, Sal, welcome. So it's one of those things where it's like, we don't know yet. These are things we're going to have to learn. Hello, Selmaz. Good day. And, that kind of stuff. So the excitement of the new creation of process, even though this is a cleric item, all the girls are interested in magic one way or another. They'll have magic. So this is something that would be very interesting to all of them. So while they're doing that, the boys go to the stables. And here they get to meet Deacon's horse and Deacon's hippogriff. If you'll remember, the Fire Moon has hippogriffs. And so he has had one his whole life, and he loves to ride them. He's trained to do so. And so he gives them each a turn of riding on the back of his hippogriff. They've ridden horses. They're not as excited about that. So they get to ride on the hippogriffs on the back. So, hello, Shad. So, two very different experiences. Ran hates it. Well, I appreciate that, Sky. Thank you. I do. So, Ran hates it. Ran does not have a fear of heights. Heights itself does not bother him. But flying just makes him queasy. Doesn't like it at all. And he's seen his father fly on the back of Mercy's griffin. But what he doesn't realize is that he does not like it. Ran and Quan, neither one of them like flying. That is hereditary. They do not like that a little bit. So by the time they hit the ground, he's trying to act all brave. Again, he's one of the youngest of all of them. But it's all he can do not to hurl. He just hated it. Seraph, on the other hand, loved it. He stayed on there as much as he possibly could be. He loved it until they had to land and give the hippogriff a ride. But he comments how much he enjoyed that, and he's like, I'll be honest with you, that was probably the coolest, most awesome sensation I've ever had in my life. He's like, I don't know how or when, but sometime in my life, I'm gonna have to get me a mount that flies, because that was awesome. And it's one of the most excited they see Seraph. Seraph a lot of times very quiet and still, but he just goes on, loved flying. Let's see. So they meet up with the girls that afternoon, and they go spend some time in the city. The birthday was today. Today was the big thing. They got a big meal, but they go and they grab some snacks. They all have a decent amount of money on them, and they're also very careful to keep an eye on it for fear of pickpockets. Even a royal or noble's not immune to pickpockets. But they go in there and they get to hit some of the street vendors, buy a couple of little things, buy some stuff. Let's see, we've got here. So while they're in town, Deacon takes them all to a special store, and he says, I have somewhere special. I want you guys to come with me. It's not far, but he doesn't tell them what it is. When they get there, it turns out it's a mage shop. It had only been open about a year, and Deacon had only been in here a couple times on his trips back, but he really wanted to show it to Dandy. So Dandy comes in, and it's owned and run by a half-elven mage female named Dadrian. And Dadrian is very excited to see Deacon. Oh, Deacon! No, because she hears, oh, you're trained to be a mage. That's awesome. The prince has some magic stuff. That means he might be a little bit okay with mages. You know what I mean? Some people like him, some people don't. Father, not that big of a fan, but maybe in the next generation it'll be cool. So she's very much in there, and she kind of has this look on her face, a knowing look. And Artis and Maeve and Seraph kind of pick up on it, and they're like, what's going on? Something feels a little off to them. Well, then Deacon smiles and nods his head, and Dadrian says, you're Petal, right? Petal goes, yeah. And he goes, I was told that you're a mage as well. She's like, well, I'm training to be a wizard. We're not mages yet, but we're working on it. I go to school with Deacon. We're friends and we train to be wild mages. She goes, yes. Actually, he's spoken of you quite often. And she's like, oh, really? Well, that's awfully nice. Because, again, Petal is basically oblivious. He goes, yes. And he asked me if I could get something for you. Petal's like, oh. And she reaches down behind the counter and she pulls out a little wooden box and she opens it up and she takes it out. And in her hand is a very fancy silver-tipped scroll case. It in itself is fancy and waterproof. Important for scroll cases. Buy the waterproof ones. I'm telling you, soggy spell scrolls, not something you want to deal with. Waterproof, silver-tipped. They give it to her, and she opens it up, and inside is a scroll. And when she takes it out, it's a spell scroll. Deacon had commissioned a special spell scroll to be made for Dandy. He's like, hey, I didn't get you anything for your birthday a couple months ago. I said I was going to get you something later, and you forgot about it because I was having this made, so on and so forth. It's not that big of a deal. I just thought you might like it a little bit, so on and so forth. Well, she's ecstatic. And it's a spell that I don't have it down here, which specifically, well, it'll pop up later. But it's something kind of fun that would be up her alley. And so she's super excited because not only she get this cool scroll case, she gets a spell scroll. And if she does her magic right, she can learn this new spell. You can cast it directly from the scroll, but if you do, it then basically burns up, the scroll is empty, and you've used the spell once. But if you successfully copy it into your spell book, then you can cast that spell moving forward. So giving someone a new spell to a wizard, that's serious business, especially someone as low level as them, who mostly only have cantrips and maybe have a spell at this point, a real spell, maybe two. And I can tell you it's magic missile, because any mage worth their worth takes magic missile first. They've got several cantrips and such, but to get another spell, even if she's like, I can't cast this now, knowing she has that she can eventually learn that spell, huge thing. So she's super, super exciting, and she just jumps over to Deacon and gives him like this great big old hug, and thank you, and all that kind of stuff. And the whole time, his face just gets red. And he's like, yeah, I'm glad you liked it. I saw it. I thought maybe somebody likes it, and kind of stuff like that. And it's all everyone else can do, even Seraph, not to burst into laughter, because Petal's so excited about this and what a nice gift it is, and you're awfully, that she's not picking up on anything. She is 100% oblivious, but it's one of those things where she's super. He got a reaction. He was happy. She's very, very happy for it. So that went well. Again, everyone can see it except Petal. So like I said, they do different things and such until they travel back home for the actual official birthday, right? Because there's going to be a big dinner for his little brother. He's going to be there. It's still a baby. He's one. I don't know what babies can do when they're one. Don't have a lot of babies in my life. So the baby's doing 1-year-old baby stuff. I don't know if that's eat solid food. I don't know if you can walk. I don't know if you can write a novel. If you're one, he's doing what 1-year-old babies do. We'll talk. I'll have to research babies. I don't know. But they're there and they're getting to hang out and such. And there's a lot of cool treats and there's cake and all that kind of stuff. And they just have a big kind of fun party banquet. But at the end of that, that's kind of, they don't go back into the city that day because they're there spending most of the time actually celebrating the birthday until the end of the night. So the next day comes rolling along. The next day, another special event was planned. And this was a tour of Thickaway's house. Now, Thickaway's house, very special. And I believe I've mentioned it once or twice way back in the day. But we're going to go into a little bit more detail. So they get to go to Thickaway's house. Thickaway's house stands in what would be, most people would appear, is a little park. Very grassy, there's some benches, and most people use it as such. But his home is an incredibly fat, short tree. If you ever saw the old Gummy Bears cartoon, or if you ever saw, I'm trying to think of other ones like that. It's like the Keebler Elves, where the tree is bushy, but it's not super high, but, it's really fat. And its doors built right into it. The house was magically created for Thickaway. And the land around it, kids play and such, and he loves that. But the house was made very special for Thickaway. And they get inside, and it's exactly what you'd expect out of a Kender home. It's atrocious. None of the colors match anything. There's stuff everywhere. And I don't mean that cluttered or dirty. Very, very much far from that. Thickaway's very orderly. But when it comes to decorations, it's like, he's the type of person. Thickaway collected two things. And one of them was bones. He wanted a bone from one of every type of thing he ever fought or found. So it's the type of thing where you'll find little skulls or medium-sized skulls on plaques hanging on walls and stuff, or antlers over here, or a horn or a claw, some type of thing from all the stuff that they found. There's one that actually talks about his one of his favorite ones is just this big wooden plaque on the wall, and on top of it is just this little tiny bone. And it's all part of one of his favorite stories where he was out by himself one day and had to fight the world's smallest giant and took its finger bone as a prize. Talks about how vicious the battle was. Most people would have never survived, but thankfully, due to his overwhelming skill and capabilities, he managed to defeat the world's smallest, yet most dangerous giant, because it still had all the strength of a giant, but was only 1.5 feet tall. No one else was there to see it, or could verify exactly what type of bone it is, but he tells the story quite frequently whenever given the opportunity. And that's pretty cool. They enjoy that. But the best part is when they get to go into the basement, because he has a basement. And so they go in these stairs and they make their way down, and all of them, except Deacon, who's been there before, gets their mind blown a little bit. So when they walk into this room, it's not a room. It has the same effect as the chest of holding. It's twice as big downstairs as it ever could actually be outside. But inside of here, there's a river that flows through it. There are trees that are growing, plants, flowers. There are birds singing. There are little animals running everywhere. And it doesn't go on forever, but the walls look like they're sky. The ceiling, it looks kind of like you're outside. There's a breeze, fresh air. There's fish in the river. The water flows from one end to the other end of the room, but where it goes or where it comes from, no one knows. This was part of the magic that was created. This was created through a wish, because he also collected pets. He loves animals. There's a deer in there. There's going to be bunnies. His cat's in here. It's like, and occasionally it'll lightly rain, and it'll have weather effects. Never gets winter, never gets cold or something uncomfortable for the cats. But like light rains and things like that for a little bit, and animals will play in it. But he's always bringing home a new animal. There's mice in there running around, maybe a hamster, But the basement was always his place where he kept all the cool little animals that he found. And he had a small pouch of holding that would only hold small animals, but it never ran out of air. So he'd find little animals and put them in there, and he could feed them and then bring them home and put them in there. That was a gift from Zoltan for helping on the quest with Rafe and Nylak. So he still has that pouch. But yes, so they get to see his magical basement, which is his personal little forest full of animals. So they should spend some time there, and then they head back home where they have lunch with the king. The queen is tending to the little brother and such, but they spend some time with the king, and then they go down and they attend the first day of the tournaments, and they get to see the jousting and the sword events and all that kind of stuff. They get to spend some time walking around looking at the street vendors. There's games and things, and all the kids play some of the games except for Seraph, who refuses because he doesn't want to win. And that's one of those things. Seraph normally stays out of competitions because his skill, and his natural strength and speed, he's almost always going to win. And he doesn't want to do that, take it away from everybody else. So he almost always abstains from any activities of that nature. But they get to that. While they're there, Artis finds a really, really pretty carving of a horse. Mom loves horses. She loves her griffin too, but she loves horses. So Artis sees this and is like, I want to buy this for my mom. And so a big chunk of her money goes towards that. But it's like a wooden carve, but it's incredibly lifelike, and it's a good size. And she's excited. They take a trip back to the castle. They can leave it there because they don't carry around all day. She gets that for her mom, and all that's kind of happening. So, wow, it's already 9:15. Interesting. You're not able to join the Discord. Go to my website, Onlydraven.com. There's a button near the top you can click on. Should take you right in there, Shad. Sometimes the link in the description doesn't work. If you go there, that one should work just fine for you. Okay. So they get to see kind of these things. So Afterwards, gets cooler, sun goes down a little bit. Lots of partying in the streets, and they get to hang out. This is the first night they've got to go down there and really get to see all this stuff that's going on. And they're kind of just hanging out and just watching stuff. Like I said, that's where there's some games, throw the ball and knock the pins over, ring on the bottle, darts in a balloon. Yeah, all the traditional fair stuff that, wouldn't require electricity. All the stuff that they could reproduce at that point. And, Maeve is at one point is just determined to win a horse for a stuffed a rabbit for her one of her siblings, and so she's up there just whipping these balls, trying to hit these cans, and she get every so often hear, "These are magic cans. There's no way that can moved. I swear that can moved." Like, she's so mad because she just can't quite seem to hit it. But there's nothing wrong with the cans. It's just not good at throwing stuff. So, that's kind of happening. They're having a good time. So the kids, the girls and Ran are kind of doing that, and Deacon and Seraph just kind of sit on a bench. There's a bench just off to the side. There's some games and stuff. And there's a big area where some music's being played. People are dancing, and they're just kind of sitting back and relaxing and watching all the festivity, listening to music, that kind of stuff. Maybe chatting a little bit between themselves. While that's going on, Deacon's explaining some of the dances, because some of the dances you had back in that type of thing are kind of like line dancing and such, where the moves mean different things, and this dance means this, and this the step, and the blah blah blah, and this symbolizes the this, because again he's trying to show all the cool stuff he can think of to Seraph, right? He wants to show off for his friend. So while they're sitting there listening to people laughing and chatting and dancing and music, through all that noise and sound, Seraph hears the tiny jingling of what sounds like a couple bells. Just a light jingling. And for most people, they would never pick that up, but his hearing so good that odd sounds that pop up out of nowhere are going to interest him. He fears it's a faint sign of some type of chime or bells. He starts looking through the crowd, trying to see where the sound is coming from. Deacon's still chatting about the dancing. When a short distance away, he sees a young woman. She looks to be probably 17 or 18. Long, light brown hair, tied up with a blue ribbon. She's wearing what would be a simple dress, but pretty. And she's carrying a basket, and it appears that she's selling flowers. There are some small bells that hang from the side of the basket, so when she moves around, the little bells chime. So this girl's, walking around selling flowers. And if you've ever been in a downtown area at night, you'll run across people like that, buy a rose for your girl, mister, kind of thing. I've seen that stuff. I've done it. Not sold them, but I've bought them and things like that on dates and such. So you see things like that. This young woman's walking around selling flowers to people. Same kind of thing. Not all roses, different types of flowers in there, but something of that nature. Like I said, the girl, she looks pretty. Well, it only takes Deacon a moment to realize his friend hasn't moved or blinked in about 2 minutes. And he looks at him, he's trying to see what he sees, and he sees the girl too. And he looks at Seraph and he's like, "My friend, what is it you're looking at?" And Seraph just, all he says is the word eyes, like eyes. He's staring at the girl. And he's staring at her in her eyes so much that it takes him a moment to realize that she's on her way over toward them. He's halfway there before he realizes it. Of course, as she approaches, she greets the prince first. The prince is well known. Even if you've never seen the prince, I'm sure he's wearing an outfit that has a crest of royalty. He has got something on him that you will know he's the prince, right? And she greets him, of course. And, same thing, welcome home, because, everybody knows he travels. And asks him, would you like to buy a flower for someone special? Deacon gets a little red in the face, and he's like, yeah, I'll take a flower. And she says, "Oh, excellent," and she gives him a price. He hands her a coin, and he gives him a very, very pretty flower and says, "Wow, to receive something like that from the prince himself, she must be a very, very special girl." And he's like, "Yeah, it's somebody I know and such. Like, I mean, just kind of hang out sometimes, like a friend of mine." And he gets all red. The girl then turns and looks at Seraph and asks Deacon, "And who is this fine young lord next to you?" And Seraph just sits there. And he just doesn't say anything. He's just staring at her for a moment or so until Deacon finally takes it upon himself to introduce him. "This is Deacon, or this is Seraph. He's my best friend. He's traveling from the Kingdom of Serenity. He's here for the festival and such. He's hanging out with us." And the girl smiles and says, Well met, Seraph. May I ask, would you like to buy a flower?" Says, "Surely an attractive young man like yourself must have someone special." And then comments, "Especially with beautiful hair like that." Because remember, his hair is white. You don't see that every day. Seraph struggles to speak. He finds himself tripping over his own words. He's quiet normally, but the man normally doesn't have these issues. And finally shakes his head and says, "No, I don't have anyone to give one to." The girl smiles and tilts her head a little bit and looks at him for a second. And she reaches into her basket and pulls out a flower. She snaps the stem off, so it shortens it. And then she leans in on his head. Seraph freezes and doesn't move. He does this for two reasons. One, he doesn't know what's happening. But number two, Seraph is always conscious that even the wrong movement accidentally, he might hurt somebody. He is very strong and he's very fast. And so in situations where he's not sure what's happening, he has to literally get himself to not move for fear of accidentally hurting someone without trying to. But she reaches in and tucks the flower in his hair, kind of over his ear. And says, "Well, I'm sure it won't be long until you're breaking hearts like our prince here," with a big smile. "Sure it'll be in no time." And then she thanks Deacon, turns and begins to leave. Seraph blurts out, kind of stumbly, asking her what her name is. And she smiles and says that her name is Danielle, but everyone calls her Dina. Seraph thanks her for the flower, and she waves. She heads out back into the group of crowd to continue selling her flowers. Seraph watches her leave, admiring the grace of her movements until she's finally lost in the crowd. Deacon is just sitting there looking at Seraph with a smile on his face. Seraph's oblivious to it. Until he finally says, "Seraph, my friend, your jaw must be getting filthy. It's been on the ground for quite a while now." Seraph realizes he's sitting there, looks up and catches himself. Because in his mind, if you've ever been in that moment, you don't realize you look like an idiot when you're just staring at someone. You don't know you look as bad as you do until someone points it out or you see it later. You're just like, sometimes maybe you're watching a movie, maybe you're hearing a song, but in that moment when you're concentrating on something, you look horrible. It is a fact of life. When you're that focused on something, you're drool falling out of your face kind of thing. So there's that kind of thing. The comment made by Deacon, of course, shocks him back into himself, and they look at each other for a moment. Deacon smiling, Seraph kind of holding his mouth because he realized what he did, and then they both start laughing. They just both start laughing at the whole situation of it all. It's about that time that the girls in Ran return. Maeve, overwhelmingly excited. Look, she says, "you're not going to believe it." And they're laughing, and they turn to her, and she's sitting there with her hands full. She goes, "I found a pie vendor. They have pie here." And that was just more than Seraph and Deacon could take. And they just start cackling in laughter. And she's like, "What?" And there's a little bit still on her face, dribbling off the bit of her little chin hair. But it's good pie. It's pie. It's really good pie. When they ask what's funny, they can't stop laughing. The night continues on. They enjoy themselves and find themselves once again back at the keep that night to get some sleep. Now, the next day again, there's another special event. Today there's going to be a parade. Now, parade is not something Serenity has really ever had. It's not something that's ever popped up. So they're very excited to see their first parade. And Deacon says, oh yes, every year people decorate their wagons. Different farmers, different people, especially a lot of the local businesses will do that. Try to advertise their stores and such. And they'll travel through, and people in costumes and dressed like clowns and jesters and things. And sometimes they'll throw candy into the audience. And they're like, this sounds awesome. I totally want to see this. So they get to go and watch the parade. And the parade is early. It's right before lunch. It's to start off the day. And they get to watch it. And sure enough, there's people spitting fire and doing all the carnival-y kind of stuff in the parade and dancing along and twirling batons and sticks and such. And people walk around playing flutes and things. So it's a very exciting thing. They all get to see the parade. Very, very cool stuff. And then after that, they get to see the archery contest. Again, it's just one of those things that's being run that day. It's just something fun they get to watch. No special reason. They return back to the keep because they're going to get a very, very special lunch. The king has arranged for them to eat silverfish. So silverfish, for those of you who may remember an older episode, the king explains, comes from one lake far to the northeast, just on the border of what is Fire Moon's kingdom. And he has worked out with the small towns that live around the lake trade, and the fish are incredibly delicious and only found in that one location. And so they get to try these delicious silverfish, which are expensive and shipped in for this special occasion. In the afternoon, they spend some time at the castle because a very, very relatively famous bard, an elven bard, is coming through and will be performing in honor of the prince's birthday week. While this is going on and you're watching and such, and he's singing and telling his stories, he entertains for a good hour and a half. Through it all, no matter what they're doing that day, whether it's the parade, the archery, the delicious fish, or even the bard, Seraph finds himself only thinking of one thing. And that's Dina, the young woman he met the night before, even during the bard. Deacon even comments to him about one point. It's unlike Seraph. Seraph's always adored watching a bard's performance, and this one's extra talented. He's very good. Songs, great voice, and the stories he's telling, all the kids are clapping and stuff. Maybe have a couple magic tricks that, illusions kind of thing go along with it. But it's like, yeah, it's odd. You're not really focused. Seraph tries to explain. It's just, he's obviously struggling with it. And Deacon holds up his hand and goes, "Worry not, my friend." He goes, "Clearly you're smitten with the girl. It's quite obvious." Seraph's like, "It is?" Deacon's like, yes, it is. He goes, "Tell you what, tonight, after this is all done and we've had our dinner, if you'd like, we'll go back and hang around that town again. Maybe we'll be lucky and she'll come by. You can say hi again." And Seraph's like, "I think I'd like that, yeah. If that's all right." He goes, "Yeah, sure. We don't have any special plans. We're just going to hang out. We'll go down and hang out around the bench, and maybe if we're lucky, she'll come back around." Now, while they're having this conversation, the girls are overhearing it. They're only a short distance away. They don't say anything, but they're delighted. Seraph is normally so withdrawn. They never saw the girl. But they're also intrigued. What girl is it that could make Seraph come out of his shell a little bit? How interesting. We'll have to keep an eye out this evening in case she comes around. Size her up ourselves. So they're going to try and be sneaky and stay in the area so they can keep an eye out and see her as well. So after the evening ends and things are fine, or all the events are gone, they have a dinner there as well. Once again, they make their way back out into the city as the sun goes down. And they find themselves, seeing sights and playing games, getting candy apples and popped corn and things of this nature, snacks they don't normally see all over the place. And they make their way back to the same bench that they were sitting on before, the previous night. And of course, again, the sounds of music and dancing is going on nearby. The girls in Ran, not too far away either. They've all got themselves some type of snack, and they're kind of sitting a ways so they can kind of see them without being obvious, but trying to watch to see what happens. And they sit there for a couple of hours. Several times, the girls in Ran will go get snacks or go to play a game, or some of them will go to this, while someone always stays there and watch to keep an eye out. But Deacon and Seraph are just sitting there chatting away on the bench. Seraph almost gives up hope, until suddenly in the crowd he hears the slight jingle of bells. Again, looking through the crowd, he sees her in a distance away. He sees that she's currently selling some flowers to a young couple across the way. Let's see. Give me 1 second here. Oh, and then points her out to Deacon. Lost my point. Points her out to Deacon. Deacon is like, all right, man, just play it cool. He's like, just remain calm. It'll be fine. When she gets over here, we'll just strike up a conversation. You imagine this, right? It's a 13-year, it's like 11, almost 12, and a boy who's 15. Like, okay, we're just going to be cool. Here's our plan. This is what we're going to do. And trying to, figure out ahead of time what's going to happen. After a few minutes, she's selling some flowers. She's looking around, looking to see if there's anyone else who might be interested, and she notices them sitting on the bench. She smiles and comes walking back over. And at this time, both of the boys stand up, to greet her. Dina smiles and says, well, fancy meeting you both here again. And looks at Deacon and says, did your special someone enjoy her flower? And all the, I'm going to be totally cool, don't worry about it, we'll strike up a conversation, goes out the window. He's like, oh yeah, I thought she liked it. I kind of put it in her room, and she didn't really say anything, but I'm pretty sure she probably liked it. She likes flowers. The same thing, the same issue. And so they just kind of, everybody's listening to music, and they chat a little bit, and she's like, so what are your, asks, what are your plans for the evening? And we'll say, nothing in particular. We're just here enjoying the celebration. We had some things at the castle a little bit earlier and such, but we're just, kind of down here, just enjoying the entertainment, the games, the food, and so on. And, just small talk, if you will. And as they're standing there, just kind of hanging out, Seraph notices that the girl starts swaying a little bit to the music because the nearby band is playing. And Seraph is doing his very best not to watch her moving. You know what I mean? Unconvincingly tries to look everywhere else. Right? You can imagine that, right? Here's this pretty girl kind of dancing. He's like, okay, trying to be appropriate here. Trying not to look. The girls in Ran at this point have moved a little bit closer, hiding behind a stall, watching all this is going on. Ran comments, she looks pretty. Maeve is like, really? It's hard to tell with humans. I guess. Maeve, still trying to learn that part. And then they all giggle a little bit at her comment and they of course giggle also at Seraph's obvious discomfort. Like they could see this. So they're sitting there. So we're standing there kind of talking a little bit, just hiding, mostly just kind of all standing near each other, not really saying much. When all of a sudden someone says, Dina, would you like to dance? The words were out of his mouth before Seraph even realized he'd said them. And immediately, it's all I could do not to slap his hands over his mouth. Everyone, Deacon as well as the girls in Ran, are shocked. Something so forward to come from Seraph, who's not normally like that. Dina stops and looks at him. Kind of tilts her head and kind of looks at him, kind of gives him the once over, looks at him for a minute. And then smiles and says, yes, I would love to. She turns to Deacon and says, my lord, would you mind watching my flowers for me for just a few moments? Deacon's like, of course, I'd be happy to. I'll keep him right here on the bench. Watch him every second. You won't lose a one, I promise. And then she smiles, and she takes Sarah's hand and leads him out into the dance floor. Now again, even though he's a couple years younger than her, doesn't really look that. And he stands a full head taller. She barely comes up to his chin. You know. And they begin to dance. And immediately, Seraph's good at it. Some people would say it's a blessing, some people would call it a curse. But almost anything physical, if he sees somebody do it once or twice, he can almost perfectly imitate it. That's not everything in the world. You know, somebody reads off a poem, he's not going to be able to read it back word for word. But when it comes to physical movements, it's very easy for him to mimic someone's movements just by seeing it once or twice. And so watching the dancers, and Deacon explaining some of it yesterday, even as he's walking on the dance floor, he's seeing the movement, the common movement. And this one, it's not like you're all doing a line dance, it's just people dancing. It doesn't take him long to step in and immediately be able to reproduce what he saw other people doing. So he's pretty good from it right off the bat. After a moment, he's able to stop concentrating on the steps and what he's doing and begins to concentrate more on her. As they move across the dance floor, dancing, she's smiling and laughing, he could smell the fragrance of flower from her, as well as a hint of leather, oddly enough. New leather. He can tell the difference. Very, very sensitive nostrils. But Dina's dancing and laughing and smiling, and it makes him do the same. And they're kind of just bumbling around the dance floor for a good 7 minutes, doing the twirling. He's twirling around and stuff, and they have a lot of fun. Eventually, though, the music stops, in Seraph's opinion, drastically way too soon, and everyone, of course, stops and is clapping for the band. The two return back to Deacon, who says, look like they had a lot of fun. And Dina thanks him, says, yes, I really did. Thank you so much, my lord, for the dance. Dina takes her basket back from Deacon, who remarks that it's deceivingly heavy. Dina laughs and says, well, with luck, it'll be much lighter by the end of the night. You know, she's trying to sell them, right? That's the whole point of it. So, you know, they're kind of just standing there at that point. And Seraph says, if you would like, I could carry it for you for a while. The girls, who with Ran again have snuck even closer, again, surprised by his boldness. Again, so is Deacon. But no one is more shocked than Seraph himself. He's confused by how confident he sounds, while inside he's a complete mess. Once again, Dina looks at him, kind of judging a little bit, kind of looking at him. And once again, smiling, said, yes, I think I'd like that a lot. Seraph takes the basket from the young woman, which for him is overwhelmingly light, of course. And then Deacon says, well, I'm going to go ahead and catch up with the rest of our friends, Seraph. Try not to be out too late. Seraph did not think he was going to be going alone. He assumed Deacon would be coming. He's like, what? Excuse me? He's like, yeah, you guys have fun. I'm going to catch up with the girls, and I'll see you back at the castle tonight. Don't stay out too late. And then Deacon turns and begins to walk away. And Seraph's like, Deacon? Deacon? But then he feels to take her hand and said, here's some people. I think they might want flowers. And he feels himself and the basket being pulled towards a crowd. Deacon watches them go and smiles to himself. And just to himself, he says, well done, my brother. Good luck. Over the next few hours, Seraph accompanies Dina around the kingdom, around the city, I should say, as she's selling her flowers, right? See all sorts of different flowers. She's walking around trying to sell them. Again, pretty girl trying to sell her flowers. Very quickly, she comments how much of a benefit it is having Seraph there. Not only is he carrying the heavy flowers for her, but right off the bat finds, makes a comment and he goes, sometimes I try to sell flowers to the gentlemen, they get a little bit too flirty. They're not doing that as much with Seraph there. And at the same time, with Seraph standing there, some of the girls whose man is buying a flower aren't getting quite as jealous either. So it ends up being quite a benefit having Seraph there. And while they're going around and such, Dina occasionally can't help but notice that all the multiple young women who are eyeing Seraph as well. Because again, Seraph's a very good looking dude. And again, that white hair right? That's going to stand out in any crowd. Here's a guy dressed all in black, but with snow white long hair. He's got it tied up right now with a ribbon, but still, long white hair. And while Dina seems to notice this, Sarah, oblivious to all of it. He asks her about herself, and as they're walking around and such, they end up starting a new conversation, and Sarah finds the conversation comes very easily. She does most of the talking, and he's naturally not like that, or he would rather listen, but he asks questions and answers when asked and things and so on, and the conversation flows quite normally. But he asks about herself. Ask her, I'd like to know more about you, so on and so forth. Dina tells him that she lives with her grandparents and her uncle. Her father was a knight of Firemoon, who had died in a battle against a large force of orcs that attacked the northern towns of the kingdom when she was only 10 years old. Her mother, who she adored, passed away one night the previous winter. She'd gone to bed early one night, just feeling a little under the weather, nothing major, but the next morning when they went to wake her, had found that she'd passed. So ever since then, she's been living with her grandparents and her uncle. Her grandfather is a cobbler, a relatively successful one. For those of you who may not know, a cobbler is a shoe repairman or maker of shoes. And his grandmother is a herbalist, or her grandmother's a herbalist. And so, her grandmother's one that's taught her and helped with gardening and the flowers, and she sells the flowers to help out and make a little bit of money of her own. Her uncle, where's her uncle? Her uncle was a mercenary who had made a small fortune in his youth and mostly lives on that and the occasional job he picks up now and again just to refreshen the pot, if you will. But all three of them adore her. She adores them. They all kind of live together. Dina works for both of her grandparents, helping with the herbalism and the stuff that she makes out of the flowers, learning some of that. She's more interested in that, the cobbling, but she does help in the store as well, things like that. And through the conversation, they learn that she's never left the kingdom. Her and her mother and father lived more to the north, where her father was stationed, if you will, until he passed, and then they came here to live with the grandma, grandpa, and the uncle until mom passed away, and now it's just her with them. But she's never left, other than going up north, she's never left the area at all. She's always lived in Firemoon. She's heard of places like Serenity. Most everyone knows the major cities in the southern kingdoms, right? Paxwell, Arduel, Cronear, which is the Minotaurs, Thorman, Corman, which is the dwarves, right? All these little cities that have, or kingdoms that have kind of allied together. So she's known them, although she's never been to any of them. Seraph, of course, answers questions asked of himself the same way. He's a little nervous when he begins to discuss his parentage because he worries that, that might kind of be a deal breaker, right? Oh yeah, my dad's a half demon, half vampire. My mom's an elf. You just don't throw that out there. But at the same time, he feels it's very important that he doesn't want to lie. He wants to tell her the truth. And so, discussing it with her, he's like, no, he goes, my father is on the planet that my father is from. You would say he's a race of people that are naturally strong and fast. As such, I have some of those skills. I've inherited those as well. My mother is an elf, and she is the high cleric of Saren. He tries to slide that out, not trying to make it like a brag, but she's very impressed. Like, Lady Artemis. I have heard of Lady Artemis. Yes. Artemis has been here way long time ago, long before Dina would have ever met her. But you hear about that, right? The elven cleric in the giant temple that everyone, that's news, right? She finds it all very, very interesting. None of it bothers her at all. After the last flower is finally sold, the two of them sit by a fountain and talk late into the night. Mostly just enjoying each other's company, but finally as it gets to the point where it's getting pretty late, the streets around them are mostly empty. Seraph, of course, offers to escort her home, make sure she gets home okay. She even mentions she's normally not out this late. She accepts, and he helps walk her home. It's a, again, modest, decent-looking home over top of a cobbler shop. And just even through the window of the cobbler shop, you can see that it's a good-sized store. The grandfather does, in fact, have a pretty good little business going on there. Supposedly he has a couple employees as well. So it's a decent-sized business. They're not a poor family by any means. She sells the flowers just kind of to make her own money. But he gets her home there. Her grandparents are kind of watching for her because, again, she's out later than normal. When they get back, she stops. She says, she goes, "Oh, I feel bad. I made them worry. I was out much later than I normally should be." And Seraph's like, "Oh, I understand. Hopefully Flynn's not burning a path in the carpet going back and forth as well. I may get an earful when I get back as well." And they both kind of laugh over that. And they say goodbye. She goes through the door. And of course, Seraph stops and goes, "Can I see you again?" And she stops and looks at him and says that she would like that very much. And so they plan to meet again the next night at the same bench around the same time. Maybe Seraph can help her with her flowers again. He wishes her wishes her good night. She goes inside. Grandpa lets her in, so he waves at him. He goes. Seraph returns to the castle in an overwhelmingly great mood. By the time he gets back, most of the castle's asleep, although there's guards that are waiting. They know he's coming in. He shows up, he gets inside, and when he gets back to the room, Flynn is there. Seraph immediately apologizes for worrying him. "I'm so sorry I was out late. I know I shouldn't have someone." And Flynn stops and goes, "No, it's fine. It's fine. Listen, you're a young man now. You're going to go out, you're going to go do things. You have that freedom." He said, "In no way am I here to judge that. I'm here in case you need me. I'd be lying if I didn't say I'm glad to see you're back home, but we trust you. But I'm still happy you made it back." So, night goes by. They sleep. Next day, tells all the details to Deacon and the rest of the kids. Because at this point, they're all like, "We all know, man. You got to tell us what happened." They're all sitting in the girls' room, and they're kind of trying, and tells everything they know he learned about Dina. Everybody's really excited for her because she seems like a really nice girl, and "Oh, Seraph's sweet on somebody." You know how it is back in this type of thing. You're a young person. I'm not saying you're going to marry in this person, but it's cool. You've got your first girl you're interested in. That's pretty cool. Everyone asks if they can meet her. Seraph says yes and tells that night the plans are to meet again at the bench. So if they'd like to come along, he'd be happy to introduce them to her. And then they're to bug her off, and they all laugh at that. So the rest of the day, they're going through more, special events and such, and while all the children are having a good time and such, the day is taking way too long in Seraph's opinion. It's taking forever, and he's still enjoying himself. He's getting pleasure out of doing things that Deacon wants to show them and stuff. So he's having a good time, but he's just eager to get to that evening so he can meet Dina. That night, the children all gather together at the bench and begin to wait. This is the last night of the celebration, so a lot of people are still out kicking it and dancing and music, and all the stuff from the other nights are there. This being the last night, a lot of people have their wares and leftover stocks, at a lower price to try to clear out some things they don't have to take home. So the children take the opportunity to buy some more souvenirs and gifts for loved ones and family back home. And get snacks and things of that nature. And then they all sit on the bench and then they wait. And they don't have watches, of course. Time doesn't move quite like that in Mergeworlds, but they're kind of hanging out. And they wait, and they wait, and they wait. And well past the time that Dina's supposed to be there, she does not appear. Seraph is beginning to worry. Children, in their own way, trying to be cool, but questioning, "You sure things went well?" Seraph is positive. He said, Yes. It was a wonderful evening, and I have no doubt that when she said she'd be here, she said she'd be here." They sat there and they wait till it's a good hour after the time she's supposed to arrive. It's possible that maybe she's just selling her flowers and is running late. Maybe she's not feeling well. It could be a lot of different reasons she's not there. But Rand says, hey, you know where she lives, right? Seraph's like, yes, I walked her home. He's like, well, why don't we just go check on her? I mean, let's be honest. I mean, when it all comes down to it, the prince, wink, wink, shows up to check and make sure your granddaughter's okay. That's not something you're normally going to be unhappy about. Deacon's like, that's right. Yeah, I mean, if I said hi, we met her the other day, and she was supposed to be there today. I didn't see her. We're just a little worried, make sure she's okay. I'm sure that they would take that as a positive thing, not a negative thing, not being nosy. Seraph's eager says, okay, yeah, that'll work. So they start heading that direction. The kids come with them. So all of them are traveling that way. They're making their way in towards what was more of a residential area, away from where the businesses such are. And the music's fading off in the background, and there's less and less people. Most of the people are either in bed already or at one of the parties celebrating. There's no crowds in this area. It's much quieter. They're halfway to where he left Dina the previous night, when he begins to smell flowers. He tells them, hey, I smell, that's her flowers. And they're always like, man, you and that nose, dude. It's crazy that you can, from here, you can smell a basket of flowers. How do you know it's not just other flowers? He's like, nope, these are the same flowers. And so they start making their way, going a little bit quicker. They travel only a short distance by the edge of an alley when they all come to a quick stop. Laying on the ground is Dina's basket. The flowers spilled all around it. Let me get a drink real quick. That's good stuff. All right. Seraph, of course, immediately gets very, very serious. And a conversation immediately starts between the children. Rand's instinct is, let's go find some guards. If this looks like something's good, or this isn't good, let's go get the guards, right? Because again, Rand's very much on keeping things orderly. Let's get the guards. No reason we should deal with this. I don't want the princess getting into any trouble. Why don't we go get the guards? The girls think, well, maybe we should still go to her house, right? Just because it was dropped here doesn't mean maybe we should go to her house and let her family know, because her family may not know she's missing as well. It might be important for them. They didn't know this. And Deacon wants to go look for her. As they kind of go back and forth a little bit, Deacon silences them all quickly. Silence. He's kind of smelling. He's like, she lives that direction, but she went that way. She points down the alley that goes between several buildings. He doesn't wait to ask them their opinion. He just starts walking that direction. The other children are like, oh, I guess that's what we're doing then. And they all follow Seraph. They travel a distance through the alley into another street, crossing it again into a second alley. As they make their way to the end of this alley, it comes to an end. On the ground, kind of on the wall, slightly on an angle, is a large metal grate. Deacon easily recognizes it as an entrance into one of the entrances to the sewer. Rand draws their attention to a large, heavy metal bar laying on the ground nearby. And they also notice that there are new scratches on the grate as well. It only takes them a moment to realize that someone has used the bar to raise or lift the heavy gate at some point recently. They begin again to speak, but Seraph very quickly stops them. He still smells flowers, but his face takes a very grave look when he says, but I also smell blood. Artis will ask how in the world he could smell that, when the smell from the sewers, a very pungent, stinky smell, is all that's wafting up at them. Because all we smell is poo. How in the world can you smell flowers? And even more so, how can you smell blood? Seraph looks at her, and in a very calm way, and actually comes across a little nervous. Like when he says it, it's very like, this is how it is. But to them, they're like, whoa. He looks at him and he says, because I can always smell blood. Seraph reaches down and wraps his fingers around the metal gate and pulls and snaps it clean off the hinges. Tosses it to the ground to the side. Rand can't help but ask, "Is this wise? Are we sure?" Seraph looks at him and says, "No, but I'm going anyways." And he hops inside, down, begins climbing down inside. The children, again, they're all armed, they have their things, are like, "Okay, let's go see what this is." And they make their way down in the sewers after them. Now, as they're traveling through the sewers, they have a couple little encounters of their own. At one point, they come across, twice, they come across a group of rats that has at least 2 or 3 giant rats in it, and are forced to fight through those. The rats are relatively savage, and Deacon had heard that there were giant rats in the sewer, though he'd never actually seen one, didn't know anyone who did. But there was a little bit of combat that went on there, and they were able to take out the big rats. No big issue. The smaller rats were actually more of a problem because they're faster. Everybody got little bites on their feet, and they're all like, "Well, we're going to have to get that healed later because we don't need rat bites killing us." Because, that would happen in these things. Serve us like a bloodhound. Yes. So they have several incidents. It takes them a little while to get through that. And, of course, they're also going through just stank, right? Luckily, the way the sewer is built, there's almost like stone sides, almost like sidewalks. And rivers and stuff flow through it. And sometimes it's short. Sometimes they'll get to intersections that go left and right. And when they get to those situations, they got to figure out where they're going to go. It takes Seraph a moment, but eventually he's like, "This way," and just starts going, and they follow him. They got to hop over the river. And they're still getting, nastiness on their shoes and the bottom of their robes and such, but they're not having to wade through anything. I want to clear that up right off the bat. As they make their way through, they're traveling for probably about 15-20 minutes, because it's slow going down here, and they have to stop frequently for Seraph to figure out which way to go. It's like it's a maze down here. And Seraph stops them because he hears voices. He needs to get closer to hear what's being said, and he kind of motions them, "I'm going to get closer." And Rand, of all people, waves. He goes, "I'm coming too." Doesn't actually say it out loud, but it gets the kind of thing. And he and Rand sneak up. Again, of all of them, next to Seraph, Rand is the sneakiest. He's very quiet. And he doesn't have any weapons jingling because other than just a small dagger, he doesn't carry a lot of other weapons. He's trained in several, but he's more of a, kung fu fighting kind of thing. So, as they get close, they can hear 2 men talking. And they sneak up enough that they can listen. And they hear the men talking about how quickly they want to be done with it all, so they can get out of this stinking kingdom. And of course, do you mean the stinking fire moon or stinking sewers? Because technically both of those would fit. And they sit here and chat and say, "Yeah, but if this all goes through, at least we'll get out of here and live like kings," kind of a thing. Eventually one says, "Ah, finally, there's the signal. Let's get the hell out of here." And he can hear them moving away. He waits a moment and then goes back to the other children and explains what they heard. And they're like, "Okay, all right, let's move." And they begin to make their way forward. When they get to the area that's very close to where they heard the men talking, Dandy quickly calls for them to stop. Not super loud, but enough that they can hear him. They all wait. And Dandy stops and looks around a little bit, and she goes, "Yup," and points to a very well hidden thin string or wire that goes across the floor. She'd found a trap. I'm not said Dandy. I'm sorry, Petal, not Dandy. Petal sees it. Oh, I said Dandy. Petal sees it. Now, Petal is a mage. She's not a rogue. She does not know how to disarm this trap. She probably would have a small chance of it if she tried, just through, hereditary. But her mom has shown her several of the different things, what to look for traps. You don't have to know how to disarm them if you can learn how to avoid them. Yes, I meant Petal. Sorry, Ashley. I even wrote Dandy here for some reason, but it's supposed to be Petal. So seeing this, they're all like, she goes, "It's a trap kind of thing. We got to get over that." So Seraph carefully lifts everybody over, because Seraph can lift everybody over, except for Maeve, who's tall enough to step over it on her own. And as they move forward in this certain tunnel they're going down, it's much thinner, and they kind of have to walk in single file. So party order, and I say party order because this is what the party order would be, probably moving forward in most situations. Seraph at the front, followed by Deacon. After that is Petal, then Ran, then Artis, and Maeve in the back. So while Deacon is probably a bit more, he's going to be a better fighter than Maeve, he's trained to fight with Seraph, having them side by side at the front. He also has some magic with him. And then right after him comes Petal, which is more magic. Ran and Maeve sandwich Artis, because in almost every situation, both of them instinct is going to be to protect Artis. Because Maeve just feels like an older sister to her. And Maeve's natural strength, even if she just punches somebody, pulls off a punch, she's going to do more damage than most anyone but Seraph would do anyways. So they continue to make their way down, and of course, as they're going, they can occasionally hear echoes of people talking, but it's hard to tell from exactly which direction. Again, as they get closer, they finally start to hear it, and Seraph sneaks up a little bit. Again, ahead this time with Ran, and they're looking in, and now they found a large chamber. And in this room, it looks like there's broken crates and boxes. There's trash and stuff thrown around the corners and the edges of the room. But on the opposite side of the room, they see basically a small dock with a boat in it. And it looks like a river flows through there, which is the actual case. There's a river that flows through there. A river flows through there, and the boat looks like it's going to be leaving. Again, on the ground and around the room, there are piles of trash, broken things. Maybe it looks like old pieces of weapons and armor and stuff. Things that have been thrown aside as non-valuable. And even a couple of bodies in different states of decomposition mixed into the piles. So, from what their first count is, it looks like they can see 8 rogues in this room. Because obviously at this point they assume they're rogues. They're crawling around the sewers. But on the small boat are a couple young women, all tied and gagged. And there are a couple more, several more, being led to the boat, although they're kind of fighting back, including Dina. Seraph and Ran sneak back to basically, try to figure out what they're going to do. But when they return, they find their friends all standing there with several rogues with crossbows all pointed at them. Without much choice, they're marched into the chamber. There were 3 rogues, all armed with crossbows. Small, light crossbows, but still crossbows. And led inside. While that was going on, 5 more rogues had come in from another chamber. So I have to say that the chamber, when you're looking at it, across the way is the lake, the dock and the lake thing. And there's a chamber going left and, or a tunnel going left and right. So it's like a 4-way intersection, but one end is a big river with a boat. And entering inside, and as they march in, clearly one of them is giving commands like he's in charge. Because he's in charge. Marched in there, all the rogues stop reaching for their weapons, seeing that they're being marched in at crossbow point. They all get a little smiles on their face, including the leader, who says, "Well, what do we have here? The bloody prince himself and his little group of friends. A little young to be playing hero now, aren't you, children?" Deacon says, "Release them, you scoundrel," because that's what he thinks he's supposed to say. McCain laughs, as does all the other rogues. "Scoundrel? I rather like the sound of that." Everybody laughs at his joke. He goes, "But my name is McCain." "My father will hear of this," Deacon says. And McCain gets serious and says, "Well, I reckon he will. But by then we'll be long gone. You see, boy, I've been running the Thieves Guild here for 6 years. And I don't mind telling you, we did pretty good for ourselves. Living well." The other nodding and so on and so forth. Then a month or 2 ago, another group suddenly appears, starts muscling into our territory, taking things over. And I can tell you this, wherever they are, they're well funded. Somebody's providing them with cash, because it didn't take long till most of my guild was either dead or one of them. Says, so yeah, either I've lost most of the people either joining them or ending up dead. And he looks at him and says, now, I don't fancy either option personally. Not really the following type, I have to say. And I'm quite fond of breathing. And again, the rogues laugh. And he's like, ha 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 ha, because he's the head rogue. So we're headed out tonight for greener pastures. Going to go ahead and leave this to them. No sense fighting over something I don't need. So we're going to head on out. But I did make a deal with a certain baron to the south. And not one of Rafe's people. To provide him some, I guess you could say, new friends. By the time the people here realize they're missing, we'll be well out of the kingdom. Now you can imagine that all of our little children heroes are very unhappy at this. They don't like this guy. They don't like what he represents. Definitely don't like what he's implying is the future of the young women in the boat. But McCain continues. As for you and your friends, well, we've not much use for you boys, or the cow, but the little girls will fetch us a good price. In his mind, Seraph can only say, I think not. Surprised by Seraph's speed, Seraph dashes across the room, managing to knock one of the rogues clean out of his rocker. Knocks him clear down. The children as well all quickly grab their weapons and move as best as they can, and combat begins. Immediately, the children do well. A bit of a surprise. These are children. They really weren't being, whether they got weapons on them or not, they weren't being taken very seriously. Seraph, like I said, he moves so fast in his strength, he just cold cocks one of them, and it just hits the ground. Ran as well does very quickly, because again, he doesn't have to draw a weapon. It only takes him a moment with a few well-placed punches and kicks, and another rogue falls to the ground with the wind knocked out of him. While Deacon draws on another, Maeve, with all of her strength, hauls off and punches the closest bowman, breaking his jaw, making him stumble backwards as well. And Artis begins to cast a spell. Well, as soon as she does, one of the rogue yells, "Beware the casters!" calling attention to the fact that some of the children have some type of spell ability. And with that, all the rogues charge in. Now, I said there were 13 of them in there. I said a few of them have already been taken down. That's still a lot. And these guys are the best that the Thief Lord has. His most loyal people, and probably the ones that are going to have the best chance. These are no slouches. They know what they're doing as well. And this is the first time any of the children have ever had to fight in what you'd call close quarters. Right? So they start going. So basically combat begins. Immediately, several of them, run towards Artis and Dandy. Most of them are wielding clubs. Very few of them have swords. A couple of them probably have a sword and dagger and such. McCain definitely has a sword, but a lot of them have some form of club or something of that nature. Maybe a mace or a morning star. And they run in with clubs, immediately trying to take down Petal and Artis, because they recognize them as casters. And even though they're kids, I don't know what they can cast. I don't need that kind of drama in my life as a rogue, so they go after the casters. Yes. Maeve intercepts several of them, standing in again to block them off. Petal manages to get off her spell, and a magic missile zips through the room, hitting another rogue square in the chest, causing him to fall to the ground. But then suddenly Rand goes down, struck hard by a club on his head. He hits the ground and is bleeding. Another one grabs Petal, and another grabs Artis, and begins dragging them away from the others. Maeve tries to help, but immediately gets hit over the head as well with a club, and falls to her knees. She tries to get back up, but suddenly she's surrounded by rogues, 3 or 4 of them, who are all just consistently beating her with clubs. She's doing everything she can to try to block them as best as possible. But through the blood in her eyes, she sees Artis being gagged and sees her being tied up. She manages to force herself up, but before she can take an even step, another huge hit strikes her against the side of her head. And she goes crashing into the wall, landing in a pile of bodies, trash, and miscellaneous things. Her hand wraps around something, maybe a pipe. She tries to pull it and stand up, but again, she's struck hard as several men kick her hard, and she feels her ribs crack. It becomes difficult to breathe. Seraph and Deacon are surrounded. While they're putting up a good showing, they're well outnumbered, and they're losing. Laying there, Maeve can see Ran also on the ground, and sees her 2 girls, Artis and Petal, fighting and kicking, but their hands have already been bound and their mouths gagged so they can cast no spells. Maeve again tries to stand up, but she can't breathe. There's blood in her lungs. She prays for help. She prays to help her sister. And instead wants to yell, "Take me, but please let them live." And suddenly, Maeve can breathe again. The smell of stink is gone, and the sounds of battle are replaced with many conversations. Slowly, she rises. She no longer feels the pain in her bones and her joints. She finds herself in a large hall full of different warriors. She stands and sees them all, but they do not seem to see her or are paying her no attention. Warriors, men and women of different kinds and armors, different races. She begins to walk through the hall, drawn towards the large chair at the end. And through her tears, she knows who sits there. And as she reaches the large knight, she falls to her knees crying. "Do not weep, child," says the god Zorn. "Today is an important day." Through her tears, she cannot look up and face him, but she says, "I do not weep for myself, my lord. It is an honor to be here before you, though I fear I do not deserve it. But if I am here, then it means I am dead. And if I am dead, then I cannot help my sisters, my friends, from death or even worse." Zorn looks down at the crying young Minotaur child before him and says, "My brave daughter, you stand in the Hall of Truth, a place millions of souls would give anything to enter, and still you question. You question your worth, and you question my judgment." Maeve looks up and apologizes. "I am sorry, my lord. I meant not to disappoint you." The large warrior smiles. "Disappoint? Nay, my daughter. I am quite proud of you. It is a strength few have, the ability to always seek the truth in all you do. It is why you were chosen. But fear not, my child. You have not yet died. You still live, though time is very short." The great god stands, the reflecting metal of his plate mail, his helm, If you're wondering what he looks like, there are figures on Onlydraven.com under the characters section showing what all the gods and all the characters look like in mini form. If you're listening to this anywhere, that'd be a place to go see who I'm talking about. The god stands, plate metal reflecting from all the torches, and he begins walking down the stairs towards her. And as he does, his size begins to shrink some, and he gets a bit smaller. And by the time he reaches her, he's only 10 feet tall. He was like 25 feet tall when he was sitting on the big throne. He looks down at her and helps her up. He says, "There's a great darkness rising that threatens the lives and fates of millions. This darkness threatens to block out the light and bury the truth in a sea of lies and deceit. In the coming days, events will transpire that will threaten everything we hold dear. And this is why I've chosen Artis. She will be my voice, pushing back against the darkness and the lies. As my cleric, she will be a beacon of truth." Then he gets down on one knee, and he's looking eye to eye with Artis. "But the path of a cleric is not for you, my child." Maeve nodded slowly and sadly. In her heart, she'd known the path was wrong for her. She felt a love and desire for truth and knowledge just like Artis, yet she felt always so out of place. The great god nods, agreeing with her thoughts. "Yes, my daughter, exactly." Then he looks into her eyes, and she starts to feel a power and a strength she's never felt before. "And while Artis shall be my voice, you, Maeve, you shall be my fist. With hammer and blade you shall bring the justice of truth on those who would hide it. You will be my strength in the battle ahead, a battle for fate itself. You shall be my fist." As he spoke, he began to glow with a powerful light, and looking down, she saw the same light around herself. "But will you accept this, my child? Will you accept the power, the strength, and the responsibilities that come with it? There will be great danger, and there will be great loss." Maeve, now crying, but in happiness, managed to say, "Yes, my lord. I will fight. I'll fight the darkness, and I will protect the light." And Zorn smiles. Reaching down, he draws his huge sword, wrapping his hands around the blade, offers her it to her hilt first. "Then take this sword, my child, and pull." Maeve wraps her hands around the sword and begins to pull, but it doesn't move. "Harder, Maeve." She tries harder and harder, yet the blade still does not move. "Feel the strength that I'm giving you. Use it with your own." Maeve pulls and pulls. Her muscles scream and her body wants to quit, yet she pulls harder and harder. Maeve felt the strength flow through her, and with everything she had, she pulled, and the sword slowly began to move. The god smiled down and nodded. Maeve screamed in anger and pain, and the sword drew from his hands. With a final pull, the sword came free, and Maeve was on her feet. Gone was the glowing hall and her great lord. Once again she stood in the filthy sewers of Firemoon. Her rise and scream had halted the battle but a moment, but it resumed. A rogue rushed in, swinging with his club. Maeve's arm shot out, grabbing his wrist, keeping him from fulfilling his swing. He was strong, but she was stronger. He reached at her with his other hand, but Maeve swung the sword in her hand. The blade she'd grabbed was old, but well made, incredibly large, designed to be used with two hands. 1/3 of the blade was broken, but it still kept a sharp edge. As she swung it, it caught the man underneath of his arm, and with her strength it continued through, cutting cleanly through, coming out the shoulder and neck the other side, having cleaved the man in two. Maeve stood there, glowing in the darkness. McCain saw this and knew something had happened, something that had changed the status quo of this battle. Emboldened, Seraphin Deacon fought harder, and surprisingly Rand too had regained his feet and attacked another rogue. The battle ensued, and quickly the tide of battle turned. McCain commanded all his minions to attack, even the ones on the boat, while he stayed back and watched. Maeve began to cut her way through them. While never fully trained with a sword, she knew enough to put it to good use. Realizing she was doing as much damage, some of the rogues turned and began to flee down the different tunnels. But by then, McCain was already gone. What few who stayed were cut down within a few moments, until only the young heroes stood there. Rand quickly rushed over and untied Artis, and then Petal, both the young women running towards Maeve. Now that the fight was over, the glow had faded, and the busted sword fell from her hand. She again was having difficulty breathing. Artis prepared to cast the only small healing spell she had, but Maeve stopped her with a gesture. Maeve placed her own hand on her own chest and concentrated. Again her hand glowed, and she could feel her broken ribs pop back into place. When she finished, she could breathe again. She was far from healed and bled from many wounds, but she would live. Seraphin Deacon untied and freed the women on the boat. Freeing Dina, she broke into tears, wrapping her arms around him. Gently he picked her up and carried her back to the land. As they checked everyone for injuries, Rand did a quick search and found another way to the surface, not far down one of the tunnels. Artis saw the blood, then noticed the blood on Rand's face. He had a huge cut on the side of his head, and blood flowed freely. Against his protest, she used her healing spell to mend the deep cut. He wanted it to use it on somebody else instead, maybe even herself, but she's like, nope, you're getting this spell. Checking to make sure everyone was well enough to travel, they decided they needed to get out of there as quickly as they could before the rogues potentially came back with more, or worse. They made their way to the entrance that Rand had found. There was a ladder leading up to what looked to be a large metal manhole cover. Deacon went up first and tried to push. Coming back down, said it was too heavy. There's no way he could move it. Seraph placed Dina down and told them to wait. She seemed hesitant, but he climbed up. To the folks on the street who were dancing and still celebrating in the evening, the nice shining moon above, it came quite as a surprise when a large metal manhole cover exploded from the ground, flying through the air and making a very loud, heavy clang a short distance away. They were even more shocked when the crown prince, covered in blood and filth, began to climb out. Immediately there was a call for guards, and several ran forward and began helping the prince and the others out of the hole. Others ran for the keep. By the time the king arrived 10 minutes later with Tubork, Thickaway, and Smalzius, Rohan and several other clerics had already arrived from the temple and begun healing those who were injured. Going to his son, who's again covered in blood and filth, begins checking him for wounds. Rohan, who was taking care of one of the girls who'd been injured, mentioned that he'd be okay. He'd already seen to him. Regardless of the stink, Rafe embraced his son and asked him what had happened. Rafe told the story as quickly as he could. Deacon told the story as quickly as he could. Even starting with the part where they'd met Dina a couple days before, and when going to check on her, found that she'd been taken, and so on and so forth. He could see that his father was not happy that he'd gone in there himself, but he continued to listen, not interrupting the boy. He told the whole story of the rogues, how they were going to kill him and Seraph and Ran and Maeve, and then take the other girls for worse, from some baron to the south, all the info he could give. While this was going on, as soon as the first part of the story came out, Tabork immediately started sending for more guards, getting an armored force. They were going to go down in there and find any survivors. It was a giant maze under the city. It would take time to get enough people to search them all. Thickaway and Smalsius stepped up to Rafe. We're going to go down first. The king nodded, and Thickaway and Smalsius made their way towards the manhole cover the children had just come out of. Smalsius, said Rafe. Smalsius and Thickaway stopped and turned back to look at their friend, their king. They were going to kill my son, Smalsius. Smalsius nods, and it will be the last mistake they ever make. Rafe nodded, and quickly Smalsius and Thickaway went down the hole. Once everyone was healed and taken care of enough that they could in, guards were sent to fetch the families of the girls or take the girls home, the ones that had been taken. Some came to take Dina home, but Dina was very, very uncomfortable and did not seem to want to let go of Seraph. Seraph asked if he may escort her home. And Rafe said, of course, but several of the guards are going to escort you. Till we know where the rest of these rogues have ended up, everyone will stay protected. They nodded, and he escorted her home. The rest were taken care of as well. Now, Rohan was seeing to Maeve's injuries. And once he saw that what few injuries she had were not life-threatening, he stopped and looked at her and he smiled. Looking back, she smiled as well. I see his aura all around you, he said. Maeve nodded. It seems you found your path after all, little daughter, said Tabork nearby. And smiling, he went and gathered several more warriors to begin the search of the sewers. Seraph and the warriors with her did not take Deacon, and Rafe was keeping Deacon nearby for a little while. This is twice in less than 2 weeks that their children have found themselves in a situation fighting for their lives. And he definitely did not want this to become a pattern. Seraph escorted Dina home. Getting her there, grandparents came out, obviously seeing clothing slightly ripped and so on and so forth, and seeing the city guards came out and asked what happened. Dina explained that she'd been taken by rogues, only to be with the intention of being sold away. And grandparents are like, it's like from the grandma, oh my lord. It says, Seraph and the prince, Deacon, came to our rescue, saved us. The grandparents, overwhelmingly pleased. The uncle had come out at this point as well. He was a big dude, too. Really muscular, big old beard and mustache. He comes in, and they all thank Seraph very much, and he promises to give their thanks to Deacon as well. And he tells her, he says that he will come by and check on her tomorrow if that's okay. And Dina nods. Then she gives him like a big old hug and thanks him. She and her grandparents usher her inside. And her grandfather says, she means the world to us. I can't tell you how much we appreciate you. Seraph bows low as he was taught, and turning, returns to go back to his friends. There's a knock on Artemis's door. It's awfully late. She makes her way over. Draven was gone for a couple days, visiting Tevin, checking, make sure everything was okay up at the home. Still concerned that there might be a man in a hat and some undead wandering around. Checked to make sure Tevin was home okay. Artemis opens the door and was surprised. But she opened the door and let Quentin in. I'd heard you'd returned. home today. Welcome back, my friend. Thank you, my lady. I apologize for bothering you so late in the evening, but I need to talk to you. Of course. Please, come in and have a seat, said Artemis. Quentin came and sat down. He seemed at odds, difficulty getting out what he wants to say. Artemis sat there quietly, giving him the time he needed to put his thoughts in order. I have been given a vision, he said finally. Artemis thought, not a common occurrence at all. And can you share with me what you saw? Artemis asks. He nods. I saw darkness. Somewhere deep, filth surrounded me. I felt pain, and I felt sadness, and I felt sorrow. I was giving my prayers the evening as I always do, when the vision struck me as such. And then there was a light, blinding light, and I felt whole again. I felt protected. I felt powerful. You know, years ago, I was given the greatest blessing any man could ever ask for. I was gifted, and along with mercy, I was given the pleasure to see my Lord Zorn. He told us we had much to do, to fight at the tower that day, to defeat the Emperor of Oromon. We would be needed. He encouraged us. But he told us we were not to die that day. And the words he said ever since have weighed on me heavily, so I've not known what they meant. For a seeker of truth, you can imagine how frustrating that could be. Artemis nods, understanding. He said, it is not yet your day to die. You both have much to do. And you both have much to teach. And Quentin smiles. He stands up. He'd only been there a couple moments. He goes, I felt I needed to share that. And thank you for allowing me to bother you so late this evening. Artemis stood too, of course. You're always welcome, Quentin. Nodding good evening, and turning, the paladin made his way towards the door. But as he reached it, he stopped and turned back towards Artemis. When she comes to you, and when she asks, the answer is yes. Send her to me. There's much to teach her, and I fear time is very short. Good evening, my lady. And Quentin left the room. Now, whoever could he be speaking of? Thought Artemis. And that's where we're going to stop for today. So, I'm hoping that you all are enjoying the children in the story and getting to tell a bit of them. As we move forward in the story, there are times when the story will be about them. There will be times when the story is about our classic heroes, and sometimes it may be a mixture of both. But the children are definitely going to be moving forward as more fleshed out characters as this goes on. So I'm hoping you're enjoying the inclusion of some new characters. Over the last couple of weeks, I've tried to, hopefully people came to care about them as well. And it was exciting because I mentioned in the past that when we created the children, I did not create their character classes. The young ladies who played the characters did. And Maeve was rolled to be a paladin. And I always knew I wanted her to get there from somewhere else. As soon as I found out, I thought that was an awesome idea. Minotaur Paladin of Truth. Didn't have one already. So having the option to get her there, I wanted that to be a journey. I wanted her to just not, hey, I'm a paladin. I wanted her to go through steps and things to find her way. And she has now taken the first step on what is her path. And Seraph has stepped on his. But that said, I am going to call it a day. Thank you all for coming by and letting me tell my story again. If you're listening to this on iTunes or Spotify down the road, I appreciate it. If you wouldn't mind, give it a like or a follow or a subscription or a rating, whatever it is that they do on Spotify and iTunes. It would help. If you're watching here on YouTube, please remember to give it a like and subscribe to the channel if you haven't before, so that way you can see all new stuff. Over the next few days, I will be releasing pictures and such of what the children look like as minis on the website, so I will probably have those for next Thursday. I'll introduce them next week, but I'm excited to see how you guys feel about that. So any feedback you have, jump into the Discord. We got a Mergeworlds there. Message me directly if you prefer. I'd love to hear your thoughts on what you heard today. Let me see here. It makes a lot of sense. The God of Truth would want his followers to seek their own truth after all. Very much so. Very much so. So thank you for sharing that. You're very welcome, Mystique. I'm glad you were able to stay for the whole thing. But I appreciate you. Thank you so much again. I only get to do this because you guys listen. So I appreciate you giving me the opportunity. I'm really enjoying coming out with this new content. I did want to say, just as a future warning, a lot of episodes are going to start probably leaning more towards the 2-hour mark instead of the 2.5-hour mark. Today, I had a lot I wanted to get through, so we did. But some of the podcasts do run a bit long, and I've had to break them into 2 parts occasionally. And then sometimes if I do need to run long, I'd like to have that buffer. So I'm going to be aiming for a little bit more around a 2-hour mark moving forward, so that maybe at the end of it I have a few minutes more to take questions and chat with you folks. But yeah, I'm excited to see where the story goes, and I mean what you guys think of where the story is going to go. Hopefully there's been some surprises at least once or twice over the last few episodes. All right, everybody, thank you very much for hanging out with me. As always, very special thank you to the members here as well as the subscribers on Twitch. Thank you so much for your support. I appreciate it. Extra special thank you to my moderators for all the hard work they do keeping my booty in line. All right? You folks have yourselves a wonderful night, and I will see you again next Thursday for a little bit more Mergeworlds. Have a great day.